Hello and welcome. I'm Leigh Ann Gerrans and you're watching W News, broadcasting live from the Arabiya headquarters. These are our top stories. Real life resumes for the people of Damascus despite hundreds of Israeli airstrikes targeting Syrian military sites. Now, all eyes are on the West as the US and the UK discuss their future relationship with Syria. And celebrations in Saudi Arabia as the country is officially announced as a 2034 FIFA World Cup host. To our top story, and the Syrian people are beginning to adjust to their new lives after Assad. In Damascus, shops and banks are now open and cars and buses have returned to the streets. But whilst residents attempt to sweep up bullet cases and return to normality, Israeli troops have launched 350 airstrikes on Syria in the last 48 hours, primarily targeting military sites. HST leader Ahmed al-Sharaa has also continued to threaten those he believes are responsible for torturing prisoners under Assad, promising they will not be pardoned by his government. On his part, Syria's former Prime Minister, Mohammed al-Jalali, confirmed that the former ministers of his government were not under house arrest following the fall of Bashar al-Assad. He also added that in the last few months, he had only been in contact with the ousted president twice.
I only personally contacted Bashar al-Assad in the past 2 months for a maximum of 1.5 to 2 hours. I spoke to him on 2 occasions. Once when he gave me a task, and the other time when we were appointing ministers. After that, we had no contact. I received orders over the phone. I tried to get in touch with him last Sunday at dawn, but he didn't answer. The ministers from my government met with the transitional government to help ease the transfer of power and provide services to the Syrian people. We are not officially working. We are at home, but we are trying to facilitate the transitional process. We are not under house arrest.
Our correspondent Trent Murray has been at the Kenitra crossing on the Syrian border today, and he sent us this report.
After half a century of Assad family dictatorship and more than a decade of civil war, there's hope on the streets of Damascus.
What happened is a transition from a stage of injustice and tyranny to one of freedom and rebuilding. We pray to God to complete this victory for our people and for the Arab and Islamic world with goodness and blessings.
Following the final rebel offensive that swept away the old regime in a matter of days, some normality is creeping back into the capital. Banks have reopened, as have many shops. Queues like this one at this bakery were seen across the city as people try to buy food, medicine and essentials that remain scarce.
Truly, we have suffered from hunger, poverty and shortages, enduring a bad social and economic life. We were unaware of what was happening. Syrians only learned about it through the internet. The scenes were truly terrifying.
Faced with civil war and the murder, torture and imprisonment inflicted by the Assad regime, millions of Syrians fled from their homes. The UN estimates that 5.5 million refugees have been living in neighbouring countries. Many are now trying to return, despite the huge challenges.
And while Syrians abroad work to get back home, here at the border with Israel, the IDF continues to move military assets into the demilitarised zone. That strip separating the two sides since 1974. Meanwhile, in the skies, the Israeli Air Force continues to pound hundreds of sites that it says were linked to the Assad regime's military.
The Israeli military says it carried out more than 350 strikes on what it called the most strategic weapon stockpiles in Syria, claiming it did so to prevent them from falling into the hands of terrorist elements. Elsewhere, towns and cities have been destroyed by years of fighting. And while Damascus remains relatively unscathed, huge questions remain about Syria's future. For the people here, the road ahead is long and uncertain. Trent Murray for Arabiya News at the Syria-Israel border.
Staying with Syria now, as discussions with the US and UK governments have been taking place today as the West works towards a future relationship with the new look Syria. Arabiya's Washington bureau chief Nadia Bilbassi asked the US State Department how they plan to secure chemical weapons with the interim government.
It is the responsibility of those who are taking the reins of power inside Syria, first and foremost, to secure and destroy any chemical weapons that they find in areas that they control. That's the first answer to the question. And obviously you have seen HTS seize territory, and it certainly is quite possible that in the territory they've seized, there are chemical weapon stocks. They may not have full inventory of those yet, of course. They've only been in control of Damascus for a couple of days. The second answer to it, though, is that there is an emergency session of the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons Executive Council that has been called, that will meet this Thursday to address the recent developments on the ground and the current situation on the ground in Syria. And when it comes to this question of inspections and verifications, it is the responsibility of that organization to conduct verification efforts under its mandate, not any of the member states, not the United States or other states.
So that's a US stance, but how does the UK plan to work with Syria? We can now go live to London to speak to our correspondent, Olly Barratt. Olly, thank you so much for joining us this evening. Firstly, we heard from the British Prime Minister in Parliament earlier today. He said he hoped Syria was at a turning point. Tell us what else he had to say on this matter.
That's right. This was the weekly Prime Minister's questions session for Keir Starmer in the House of Commons, and he began the PMQ session by talking himself about Syria. He said that he welcomed the fall of Assad, is how he put it. He said that the people of Syria have suffered for too long under what he called his brutal regime, but he was at pains to stress a couple of times, actually, during the Prime Minister's questions session, the uncertainty about what might follow. He said initially what comes next is far from certain. He stressed that the UK has been talking to regional and global allies about trying to ensure stability to as great an extent as possible. And he talked about the need for what he called a political solution that protects civilians and minorities and rejects terrorism and violence. He was also asked about Syria later on in the session and described it as a very serious moment, but then talked about it being, as you say, a much needed turning point, which he says is by no means guaranteed. He says that what comes next needs to be peaceful, political and a rejection of terrorism and violence. So really, Keir Starmer, the UK Prime Minister today, trying to strike a note of optimism, but certainly cautious optimism about the days ahead for Syria.
Olly, the UK has also been discussing removing HTS as a named terror organisation. Could this happen, and what considerations would have to be in place first? As you said, cautious optimism from the Prime Minister.
It absolutely could happen. There's been a little bit of a lack of clarity, I think it's fair to say, from the UK government about exactly how quickly it might happen. Earlier this week, Pat McFadden, a senior cabinet minister at the top of Keir Starmer's government, was saying that this was something that was under review and that a decision would come quickly. Later the same day, Keir Starmer himself was saying that while this would be reviewed, that this wouldn't be a decision that would happen rapidly, and that several different circumstances would have to be considered when it comes to working out exactly what might come next and whether this prescription would need to be removed and how quickly it could be removed as well. And then we had clarification from Downing Street earlier in the week on the issue of what a prescription actually means when it comes to contact with an organisation that is a prescribed terrorist group. And number 10, the Office of the Prime Minister was making it clear that it is still possible for the UK government to have contacts with HTS or figures allied to it, even while it remains a prescribed terrorist organisation. But clearly that is under review, and exactly how that unfolds over the days, if not weeks ahead, is still far from clear when it comes to the UK government's perspective.
Many European countries, including the UK, are actually pausing visa applications for Syrians. I really want to know, what does this mean for the people who have made Europe their home?
Well, here in the UK, we've had some statements on this issue today from the Home Secretary, Yvette Cooper, who deals with border security and oversees things like asylum applications as well. And she's been explaining the reason for the UK's pause in applications from Syrian people. And she says that really it's because the vast majority of people making applications in this country who are Syrian are doing so saying that they are fleeing the regime of Bashar al-Assad. Well, she says that that is a situation that has simply flipped in recent days. There is clearly a huge change in circumstances inside Syria, and so therefore many of those applications that were either being considered or about to be considered have to be looked at in a different way. Yvette Cooper, the Home Secretary, says we simply do not know how events are going to play out in Syria, and so that's why applications have been paused in this country. Clearly for people who've already had successful applications, they will be able to remain in Britain, but other European countries have been taking similar measures as well. We've also seen some slightly different stances too from countries like Austria, with the Interior Minister there, Gerhard Körner, saying that he's instructed the ministry to prepare an orderly return and what he called deportation programme to Syria. That is a comment that's been worrying some refugee and rights organisations with regards to what that might mean exactly in Austria. And bringing it back here to the UK, the other thing that the Home Secretary has been saying, Yvette Cooper here, the Interior Minister, is that she has been seeing, like many other countries have been, some Syrians deciding that now is the time to return voluntarily to Syria, to return home, given what's unfolded in Syria in recent days. But she also urges a note of caution. She says we've seen initial signs of people wanting to return home, but she says it's very unstable at the moment and we need to approach this with care and monitoring the detail of what is happening.
Olly Barratt in London, thank you very much for joining us this evening. To Saudi Arabia now, where the country has been celebrating the news of the country's successful bid to host the 2034 FIFA World Cup. The country's sports minister, Prince Abdulaziz Al Faisal, has said it will be an exceptional event. Here's how the announcement was made.
The host of the FIFA World Cup 2034 will be Saudi Arabia.
For more on this, I'm joined by Al-Arabiya's English sports reporter, that's Mark Lomas. Mark, thanks so much for joining us today. We've known about this bid for a while. Tell us what we can expect from the 2034 World Cup in Saudi, and where could the Games be held?
Well, according to those behind the bid, it's going to be the best World Cup we've ever seen. Obviously, they do have to say that, but there's a lot of excitement in Saudi Arabia about the 2034 World Cup being hosted there. It's, as you said, it's been a year that we've kind of known it. Saudi Arabia is unopposed, but this is going to be an incredible event. I don't think that anything like it will have been seen before in Saudi Arabia. They have time to kind of get ready. We have 10 years, including the 2027 AFC Asian Cup, which will be taking place in Saudi Arabia. But yeah, huge news for the kingdom. It's a football-mad country, Saudi Arabia. You know, anybody who's been there understands the love and the passion that the fans have for football. And there'll be 15 stadiums, 5 host cities, 11 brand new stadiums across Riyadh, Kabul, Abba, Neom, Jeddah as well. So it's going to be some state-of-the-art facilities as well that the World Cup is going to take place in.
Mark, you just basically said football is so massive in the country. Cristiano Ronaldo plays in the Saudi League. Saudi Arabian owners at Newcastle United. Has the country always been this passionate about the sport?
Absolutely. As I said, I feel like if anyone has visited Saudi Arabia, within seconds you'll be having a conversation about somebody, about football with somebody. I've been lucky enough to go to several matches in the kingdom. I was at the Riyadh Derby last year, 55,000 people watching Al Hilal versus Al Nassr, incredible atmosphere. The Saudi Pro League has been around for 50 years. The King's Cup is almost 70 years old now. This is a real football culture, football heritage. It exists in Saudi Arabia. And yes, Ronaldo, Benzema, Neymar have helped kind of bring it to more kind of global recognition, I guess. But Saudi Arabia has always been crazy about football, and it is a very, very suitable place to host the FIFA World Cup because of that passion of the fans. 80% of people in Saudi Arabia either play or are engaged in football. So it's a huge number. And as I said, all you have to do is to have a conversation with any Saudi to understand the passion that's there for football.
You know, we saw the World Cup in Qatar was scheduled for the wintertime because it is extremely hot during the summer. Will something similar happen for Saudi? Do we know?
Absolutely. So as part of the bid process, Saudi Arabia's bid was praised. It's scored the highest score that there's ever been in a World Cup bid process, which is something to be celebrated. But, you know, it was very clearly mentioned that summer is off limits again. You know, we know how hot it gets in the kingdom at that time of year. So I think we will see a Winter World Cup again. It will cause some consternation, I think, around some of the leagues around the world. But yeah, we're still not sure exactly what month it'll happen in. I know that November to December is due to be Ramadan in 2034. So, but World Cups have previously taken place during Ramadan as well. So yeah, it remains to be seen. January could also be an option. October to November perhaps might work as well. But all of these things still need to be decided. There's a decade still to decide on these things.
Yes, I was trying to figure out how old I'll be in that next 10 years. But the country, as we say, got this 10 years to prepare for the tournament. Just basically in 60 seconds, tell me what the main things will be that they're working on.
I mean, building the stadiums is going to be a huge, huge undertaking. There's some, as I said, some fantastic looking stadiums in terms of the architectural design, but it's going to take a lot of work. Another big thing is on the pitch as well. You know, Saudi Arabia want to be competitive at the 2034 World Cup. We've seen a couple of host nations fail to get through the group stage, including Qatar last time, including South Africa. Saudi Arabia do not want to be amongst those names as well. So at the moment, the coach is Renard, the Frenchman, and he's going to be trying to improve the team. It's going to be amazing because there's lots of teenagers. Think about young Saudis now who will have the potential to represent their country in a home World Cup in 2034. So getting things right on the pitch is going to be really important for Saudi Arabia. Obviously, lots of infrastructure work to be done off it as well. Also, I think a lot of PR work to be done as well. You know, not everyone has supported the bid worldwide. I think it's important to note that. But there is time on the side for people to be shown more about Saudi football culture and Saudi football heritage. Yeah, I think there's great opportunities there to kind of open Saudi Arabia up to new audience. And yeah, these are the big important things that needs to be done over the next 10 years. Team, infrastructure, and a good PR campaign as well.
Our sports reporter there, Mark Lomas, thank you so much for joining us.
Pleasure.
Let's take a look at some of the other stories making headlines today. The family of US journalist Austin Tice, held captive in Syria for the last 12 years, are hopeful he can be returned home in the wake of Assad's fall. Tice is thought to have been captured close to Damascus in August 2012 while covering the Syrian civil war. His relatives say they have never given up hope of his return. Donald Trump has taken a light jab at his Canadian counterpart, referring to Justin Trudeau as the governor of the great state of Canada. In a social media post, the US president-elect referenced a dinner the pair had last month at Mar-a-Lago. Trudeau travelled to meet Trump following his threat to impose a blanket 25% tariff on Canadian goods when he takes office in January. Ukraine has been awarded $20 billion from the US, funded by profits seized by profits of seized Russian assets. The economic support forms a significant part of a $15 billion package agreed by G7 nations, which was announced in June. This comes a matter of weeks before US President Joe Biden is replaced by Donald Trump, who says he wants to end the war in Ukraine quickly. Germany's Chancellor Olaf Scholz will submit a request to Parliament today to hold a vote of confidence following the collapse of his coalition. Scholz is expected to lose the vote, which is set to take place next week, as his government no longer has a majority. He must then request the president to dissolve Parliament, which will trigger new elections. And Italy's Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni has been named Europe's most powerful person by Politico. The political newspaper says the Italian leader has gone from being dismissed as an ultra-nationalist kook to establishing herself as a figure with whom Brussels and now Washington can do business. The suspect behind the killing of a healthcare CEO shot in New York City last week is challenging extradition charges from Pennsylvania. Luigi Mangio has been in court in the district where he was discovered after being recognized by a McDonald's employee. Caroline Malone has more.
It took police 5 days to track down the murder suspect, but in less time, Luigi Mangione has become notorious online, with many people expressing support for his apparent cause and criticism of the health insurance industry.
That's completely out of touch and an insult to the intelligence of the American people and lived experience.
The 26-year-old was found with a manifesto on him, which has been released online and confirmed by law enforcement to say, frankly, these parasites simply had it coming. A reminder, the US has the #1 most expensive healthcare system in the world, yet we rank roughly number 42 in life expectancy. Mangione's lawyer confirmed he is fighting extradition to New York, where he would face manslaughter charges.
If you're an American, you believe in the American criminal justice system, you have to presume him to be innocent. And none of us would want anything other than that if that were us in those shoes.
When police detained Mangione, he had a ghost gun, thought to be 3D printed, and fake IDs on him, and he faces gun and forgery charges in Pennsylvania. Police say they're doing what they can to expedite the extradition process to New York as well.
We're going to do what's necessary to get the governor's warrant, and we're working, with the New York City Police Department and Manhattan DA's office, and we're going to get the defendant up there so they can prosecute him on their charges.
Mangione's X page had a banner that included an X-ray of a back. People who know him have since confirmed he had chronic back pain and underwent spinal surgery. His social media accounts also suggest his family and friends lost touch with him after that. A statement from the Mangione family says they are shocked and devastated. There's also been an outpouring of support on social media for Mangione and his apparent campaign against the health industry, and a deluge of merchandise being sold online, including T-shirts printed with the same words that were found etched onto the bullet casings found at the scene: deny, defend, depose, known criticism of the insurance industry. There have even been reviews posted about McDonald's, where he was identified by an employee, leading police to him. Some warning people not to go there as there are, quote, rats in the kitchen. The legal journey for Luigi Mangione is likely to be a lengthy process. And while investigators continue to retrace his steps, online an unusual fan club of sorts defends and even glorifies him. Caroline Malone, Al-Arabiya News, Washington.
Let's take you through the top business news. The sale of Alex Jones's InfoWar website to parody news platform The Onion has been rejected by a US bankruptcy judge. The court ruled an auction for the InfoWars did not result in the best bids possible after The Onion used funds from families of the victims of the Sandy Hook massacre, who won a defamation lawsuit against Jones. General Motors has revealed it will stop funding the development of the Cruise self-driving taxi. The car manufacturer says it will now refocus autonomous driving development on personal vehicles and made reference to the competitive robo-taxi market. The company behind fashion giant Zara has reported a quarterly fall in sales and profit today. Shares in Inditex fell around 5% and sales dropped to €9.36 billion, below the 9.51 expected by analysts. Turning to sports now, and world number one Scottie Scheffler has matched Tiger Woods' record by becoming the second man to win the PGA Tour Player of the Year award in 3 consecutive seasons. The 28-year-old American accepted his third Jack Nicklaus Award after winning 91% of the vote from his fellow players. And Manchester United are reportedly willing to sell forward Marcus Rashford in the new year. The 27-year-old has scored 138 times for United since starting his career. But this season, he's only netted 4 Premier League goals and has been given a disciplinary from the club. But let's return to the biggest sports story of the day. Saudi Arabia has won the bid for the 2034 FIFA World Cup. The country will provide 15 venues for the tournament, 11 of which will be brand new. 8 will take place in the capital Riyadh, 4 in Jeddah, and 1 each in Al-Khabar and Abha, as well as 1 in the brand new desert city of Neom. Let's get the reaction of football presenter and podcast host Peter Redding, who joins me now. Peter, thank you so much. First of all, futuristic cliff, top venue built 300 metres above the ground and multiple new football stadiums. This is all part of the plans underway in Saudi as they prepare for the World Cup. How will they accomplish these vast, extensive plans?
I think they will. I mean, first of all, congratulations to the kingdom, because it's just a fantastic, it's brilliant news for the MENA region and football fans as well. And I think it's fair to add that, you know, there'll be extreme confidence given the fact of all the international sports events that have been held there just recently. You've got boxing, you've got golf, you've got the F1, and I don't think football's going to be any different. Looking at them, I'm excited by the plans of the stadiums, I have to say, and some of the capacities as well. I mean, you're talking about 96,000 fans in the main stadium for a World Cup. I mean, what could be better?
Watching it could be better, maybe, Peter. I'm not so sure. I just wanted to go back to something you said there. When it comes to sports, Saudi's influence has really been growing. We've seen this with Live Golf. You mentioned the boxing titles too. So how important is this World Cup for Saudi on a global stage?
I mean, it's absolutely important. I mean, it's more than that. I mean, it fits in with the vision as well. But taking that sports angle as well, and it's something that has been touched on previously in the show as well by Mark, is the fact that Saudi, they have a very, very strong football fabric. It's been there for years, and it's just because the eyes of the world have turned on Saudi lately with the Saudi Pro League and all of the great players and talent that they're encouraging, that you know, the eyes and the focus have turned there. They're a football nation. They're as fervent as anyone, their fans. So I think it's an absolutely brilliant move, and I know, being in the MENA region, how excited all of the fans are. Passionate is an understatement.
But how will the 2034 World Cup work for football? You know, what kind of impact will it have on the calendar?
Well, look, I mean, at the end of the day, we were just talking about this in the studio not so long ago, that whatever happens on the international front, the domestic clubs, they tend to see it as a hindrance. But, you know, things like domestic cup finals and then a World Cup final as well, they're the pinnacle of players' careers. So player power will win. But as Mark said previously, it all depends on the month. And then, of course, your domestic managers around the globe have got to get into the probability and acceptance of when they're going to lose their key players, when the World Cup's going to be, when there's going to be a break in the season. But look, at the end of the day, the World Cup is the World Cup. It's the #1 event on the planet, and rightly so, it will take precedence.
Football presenter and podcast host there, Peter Redding. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
A reminder of our top stories. Real life resumes for the people of Damascus despite hundreds of Israeli airstrikes targeting Syrian military sites. Now all eyes are on the West and the US and UK as they discuss their future relationship with Syria. And celebrations in Saudi Arabia as the country is officially announced as the 2034 FIFA World Cup host. That's all from us on W News. Thank you so much for joining us. Riz Khan, he's coming up next. And don't miss Tom Burges Watson with GNT. Good night.
Hello, I'm Riz Khan. Welcome to the show. The world is readjusting to the dramatic and sudden events in Syria this week. The end of the al-Assad regime marks a new chapter for Syrians at home and refugees overseas. And it also marks a potential realignment of the balance of power in the region and further afield. For all of these interested parties, the future of Syria presents both risks and opportunities. And that's what we'll tackle in this episode of the show. But Turkey is seen by many as the key player in negotiations over Syria's future. It's been host to 3 million Syrian migrants, and Ankara is keen to ensure that the fallout from the regime change doesn't result in the establishment of an autonomous Kurdish state near its border. I'm joined now by Cihat Yace, who led the Turkish Navy until his demotion by President Recep Tayyip Erdogan in 2020. Admiral Yace is now an author, academic, and strategist. Admiral Yace, it's good to have you on the show. Now, I've got to start by asking, what are Turkey's goals in Syria now that the Assad government has fallen?
Yeah, well, I thank you very much for having me. And, mainly, basically, Turkey has 3 priorities with respect to my mind. The first is to cleanse Syria of the terrorists, especially PKK, YPG, and SDF. And the second is the return of the Syrian refugees to their country. And lastly, to give the Syrian Turks a status that will guarantee their political and cultural rights. These are the main 3 priorities.
Now, Admiral, of course, it's recognized how important these developments are on Turkey's situation. And I wonder, what has been the impact of what's happened in Syria on President Erdogan's influence and status in the region?
So President Erdogan is the head of the Turkish Republic, and Turkish Republic is the most stable, secure, democratic, and westernized state in the region. So, and the only state in that region which is a NATO member. So that's why Turkey is very important state in that region, for the region and also for the Western world and also for the NATO alliance.
Admiral, there are some who suspect Turkey actively encouraged the opposition forces of the HTS along with the Syrian National Army in a limited military operation that would encourage President al-Assad to agree to a peaceful settlement that could then lead to the return of 3 million refugees from Syria. But in fact, it went further than expected and led to accidental regime change. Now, the Turkish government has denied any involvement. What's your view on that?
Yeah, I exactly believe that what the Turkish authorities says. Turkey has really supporting Syrian National Army and Syria's temporary government, so transition government, which are established and supported also by the role or the participation or the contribution of Turkish Republic. But HTS is a very different organization. And there is no involvement of Turkish Republic for that organization, establishment, or improvement, or the operations, or whatever it is. So Turkey is supporting Syrian National Army. And Syrian National Army has not involved in that operation or revolution directly.
Admiral, actually a related question on this. Turkish-backed Syrian National Army forces have basically launched operations on territories held by the Kurdish-led Syrian Democratic Forces, which are backed by the US. And there have been reports that the Turkish Air Force conducting airstrikes in Syria's northeast. Is Turkey in the process of undertaking a major offensive?
First of all, I said before that the first priority of Turkish Republic is to cleanse terrorist organizations, especially PKK, YPG, from the borders of Turkey and indeed from Syria. And this is a long-run struggle, and it is a determinative. There is a determination of Turkish Republic for struggling that terrorist organization. It is not a Kurdish-led organization. It is a terrorist-led organization. Terrorist organization. And Turkish struggle has not begun with this, revolution. This is a long-run struggle, and this is just a continuation of that struggle. And indeed, by taking the opportunity of this revolution, terrorists PKK and YPG has been trying to get more lands in Syria. So Turkey has seen it. So that's why Turkey is taking the precautions for its national security.
Understood. Understood. Sir, Admiral, you've mentioned the United States' involvement, and I'm wondering, how do you expect this potential friction between two NATO members, Turkey and the US, to be resolved, and how might Donald Trump's presidency affect that relationship?
It doesn't, I think it doesn't matter who is the president of the United States, because United States is a state. So it doesn't matter who is the president, because the targets and the main policies of the United States will not change with respect to my opinion. So there is slight changes in their ways to obtain their targets. So that's why Trump had supported before Biden YPG, and also he also assigned a rank to the terrorist leader Mazlum Abdi as a general. So it doesn't matter who is the president of United States, and it doesn't. So Turkish struggle against terrorism will not change with respect to who is the president of the United States.
But Admiral, you're both NATO members. That's really the heart of it.
Yeah. So, for example, Al-Qaeda or ISIS, how come they are the threats to United States? How come? But we accept that if a nation, if a member of NATO has perceiving an organization as a terrorist organization with respect to its national security and the national interests, so as an alliance member, we accept it as a terrorist organization. So that's why I do not understand why Turkey accepting terrorist United States perception towards the organizations as a terrorist organization, whatever it is, but United States is not accepting, which is directly threat to Turkish national security. Those organizations, so they are not accepting as a terrorist organization. This is a contradiction with their NATO alliance.
Right. So Admiral, the divisions remain. Let me bring in one more factor here as we return to the look at Syria. Russian support for the al-Assad administration was a point of concern. How will the fall of the regime affect Turkey's relationship with Russia?
Oh, Russia, really, in reality, I do not believe that Russia has supported Assad regime. Russia took the advantage of the geopolitical position, geopolitical situation. And so Russia has behaved as an opportunist state. So Russia said that I'm gonna support you, but you have to give me some bases and some responsibilities in Syria. So they came to Syria and they took 2 bases, but never and honestly supported Assad regime, because I would like to hint that Israel, aircrafts, air forces have been bombing Syria for several years, but Russia hasn't shown any reluctance to Israeli planes. And also, YPG, PKK, which is a terrorist organization supported by the United States and Israel, have occupied almost 1/3 of Syria. So, but Russia has not shown any reluctance.
Okay. Well, Admiral, with the regime change, things might change. So how would the loss of its air and naval bases affect Russia's influence in the region if that happens?
So we will see that. Will they lose or will they keep their bases over there? Because Russia doesn't show any reluctance to that revolution. Even Assad begged for help and support from Russia and Iran. They didn't give any support, real support. So I think there is a bargain between the states who has interest and involvement in that Syrian revolution. So we will see the result of the bargaining, and maybe those 2 bases will stay in Syria, with respect to the bargain.
Well, we have Iran, as you just mentioned, and that has effectively lost its land bridge to Lebanon for now, along with its influence in Syria. What kind of impact is this going to have on the Iranian-led axis of resistance, as it's called, and also on Iran's national security?
So, first of all, I do not see any Iranian national security issue in Syria, because there is no border between Syria and Iran. So Iran's behavior to date has constantly opened space for Israel and provided justification for Israeli occupations. What I can say, really, it is even possible to say that Iran is a sacred partner of Israel. So I think that
is an interesting perspective, Admiral. Now, interestingly enough, also the fall of the al-Assad government provoked an immediate response from many of the 6 million Syrian refugees around the world, half of which are in Turkey, wanting to return to their homeland. I know you feel strongly about the refugee situation. President Erdogan announced the opening of the border gate to manage the expected exodus. Do you think that is a welcome move, or is that premature while the country is still in transition?
Yeah, you know, what I can say is there are millions of refugees in Turkey, and they have an impact on even inflation, on economic problems in Turkey, and even on the negative effect, very negative effect on the healthcare system of Turkey. And the population of the refugees in Turkey is more than many European states' population. So there is a huge load on the Turkish Republic and Turkish nation. First of all, they have disrupted demographic structure of Turkey. So, therefore, I don't think there will be any negative aspects of Turkey in terms of their departure.
So, Admiral, just because we only have a couple of minutes left, I want to get your perspective on this. Who do you regard as the main winner from the downfall of the Assad regime?
Yeah, Israel and PKK-YPG.
Simple as that. It's they're going to benefit the most.
Yeah, and indeed, United States.
We'll have to see. It's going to be an interesting time ahead. Admiral, I hope we get a chance to talk again. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you, sir. Israel has reacted quickly to events in Syria, with more than 100 airstrikes against military targets in the country. The Israeli government says it's destroying chemical weapons and military hardware to prevent it being used against Israelis by what it calls extremists. And Israeli forces have advanced from the occupied Golan Heights to set up a buffer zone to prevent an October the 7th style attack. I'm joined now by the former Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Olmert. Ehud Olmert, thank you for joining the show, sir.
Hello.
Let me start by asking, what are the potential risks and opportunities for Israel from the events now taking place in Syria?
Well, certainly the event in Syria is dramatic, is historically significant. After so many years, the house of Assad, which started with his father, has been removed and was rejected completely. It was a result of a lot of corruption, I think, and these are the after effects of what took place in the last decade in Syria. The fact that Bashar al-Assad was personally responsible for the killing of 500,000 of his own citizens is something that was not forgotten or was not forgiven. And finally, it took years, but when the challenge came, there was no army and no one that was ready to fight for him. And that has collapsed. And the assistance of some superpowers, including Russia and Iran, was not sufficient, and they actually lost their holding position in Syria, which is perhaps the most significant outcome at this point. The fact that Syria is now controlled by some, I have to say, unknown elements. We don't really know all of them. We know some, something about them, but I don't think that we know enough about them. What is the strength? What is the power base? What are their plans? What are they going to do? The one thing which is obvious is that the Syrian army, which used to be a very serious military power, now was a threat to Israel from the north, has disappeared. The power base that was close to Hezbollah in the Lebanon, which was their supplier and their supporter, has disappeared, which is, of course, a significant weakening of the threat of Hezbollah as well. And so in these two ways, I think for Israel, this is a positive development. However, it's too early to judge what are the long-range consequences of the takeover by fundamentalist, extremist military force, and what may be the possible ramifications. I think it's too early. We have to be very careful, and we have to make sure that they have no access to serious weapons that might cause serious damage.
I will touch on some of those points in a moment, sir. But that's the question everyone is asking, what comes next? And is there any real reason to suspect that an anti-Israeli extremist group might now form a new government?
Well, I think that that seems to be the most natural outcome. They are not friends of Israel. They are extremist, fundamentalist, ISIS by nature. I don't know if by affiliation, I don't exactly know who all of them are, but certainly there is no background of support, of acquiescence, of compromise with the state of Israel. So we have to suspect that they may become more extreme and maybe violent force that will be taking over Syria, and we have to be quite aware of it, quite careful, and watch it very carefully.
There is a lot of speculation, though, that the leader of the group, Ahmed al-Shara, or Abu Muhammad al-Jawlani, as he's also known, is trying to distance himself a little bit from that movement with a connection, at least with ISIS and al-Qaeda, and trying to win more approval from the international community so that he can be more like a government leader. And there is that strong feeling that perhaps there is a change in the way they might move forward.
Well, certainly we have to hope so, but I think we have to remain very careful. And look, at the present time, no one knows who is al-Jawlani, and therefore there is not any immediate reaction by the traditional enemies of Israel, including the Iranians, that were tied up so much with Bashar al-Assad in his favor. So I think that what shows that he is smart is the fact that he is not rushing for any statements that might jeopardize the very initial hold that he has in Syria. But what will happen later, how he will build up his political power in Syria, and who will be the potential allies of a government, if he will form a government, remains to be seen. It's a very preliminary stage. And the experience in the Middle East proves that you have to be suspicious, you have to be careful, and don't rush for judgment either way. And don't do anything that will force him or squeeze him into a corner which will leave him with no alternative but to become an enemy of yours. If there is a chance that he will not, we certainly have to watch it carefully and see if it can somehow develop in a positive direction.
Now, as everyone knows, Mr. Olmert, the Assad regime was in power for over half a century. And there has been some analysis, I would love to get your perspective on this, that Israel largely accepted the Assad regime in power because it was better to have the devil you know than the one you might not know. I'd love to get your perspective on that.
Well, this is one of those sayings that, I sometimes say, I'd rather say that Assad was a dangerous enemy. I mean, mostly his father. But he also, the fact is that he was building an atomic reactor in Syria, which I had to order the Israeli army to destroy. But the fact that he was even contemplating a possession of nuclear power in Syria shows that he was dangerous and he had to be taken care of very carefully and as we did. But and also the fact is that he has aligned himself with Iran, and he allowed the Iranian forces to take important position inside Syria, which was an immediate threat to the security of the State of Israel. So he was not a friend, and he was dangerous, and there was a good reason for Israel to be apprehensive about him. But look, if at the end of the day, Iran, the ISIS forces will grow, expand rapidly, and take over and become very extreme and very violent and very provocative, as they threatened to be in the past, then definitely we'll be able to say, rather than have them, we should have stayed with Bashar al-Assad. But I think everything is too early. I'm not sorry to have lost the neighborhood of Bashar al-Assad, but I'm at the same time, I'm not extremely happy thinking about who potentially may take over.
As you indicated, Mr. Olmert, Israel is concerned about the risk of any weapons that Syria possesses falling into the wrong hands or falling into the extremists' hands, as Prime Minister Netanyahu has said. So Israel has taken action, of course, bombing military sites and so on, and also mobilizing troops into the Golan Heights. Isn't there the risk, though, that by bombing military sites in Syria, that Israel is damaging the new government's ability to maintain control and security within its borders?
No, I don't think so. Why should where is the potential border risk to the border of Syria? Maybe I think we don't have to allow the new forces to become the controllers of the infrastructure or the military infrastructure, which has been part of the Syrian power for a very long time. So I think it's a good idea that as much as we can destroy the infrastructure, the research institutes where they were manufacturing missiles, long-range missiles, and other weapons, and the facilities where they were trying to build non-conventional weapons, chemical weapons, all these rather disappear as soon as possible. And they will not, we don't destroy, I believe so. I don't actually know everything, but I believe that we don't destroy the economic infrastructure of Syria. We don't destroy manufacturing facilities which are important for the economy of Syria. So that leaves the new leaders with enough basis to build up their hold in Syria and to contribute to the welfare of the states without the unnecessary military power base which Bashar al-Assad had for a long time.
So how do you see the balance of power in the region shifting as a result of the removal of the al-Assad regime?
Well, potentially I can say that the power of the more moderate forces, including, of course, Israel and the other moderate countries, the Arabs, has definitely been improved. I think it still remains to be seen what is exactly the game that Turkey is playing. I must say, I don't know. On the one hand, one shouldn't forget that Turkey is part of NATO. So there are certain restrictions and limitations to the ability of Turkey to use or to move all kinds of military actions, which may not necessarily be acceptable to the alliance that Turkey is part of. On the other hand, it's obvious that Turkey probably triggered some of the operations and supported, directly or indirectly, the al-Jolani. So it remains to be seen where is Turkey in this game. Turkey is, as far as Israel is concerned, of course, is a source of some concern. I have to look at it.
We'll be looking at that on the show as well. So now, just with about 2 minutes left, I'm curious, considering what's going on in Israel right now with Benjamin Netanyahu going into court to appear on corruption charges, would you be comfortable commenting on that? I know you went through this, you denied all the accusations against you, but would you be comfortable commenting on what's going on with Mr. Netanyahu right now?
To tell you the truth, this is a legal process. What I was absolutely unhappy with was the fact that Netanyahu was using every possible manipulation, the power of his position, the power of the government in order to try and prevent a due legal process. But and I think it's very important for the stability of the system in Israel and the nature of the Israeli democracy that it's taking place. What will be the outcome of this, I think, remains to be seen. I don't know. I have no idea. I'm not familiar with the specifics of the accusations. It smells. It sounds bad. It looks bad. The efforts that they were making in order to prevent his appearance in court almost speaks for itself. But we have to trust the legal system and let it works. And hopefully the truth will come through.
We've got, of course, a very divided country in Israel with people very much split on the whole perception of Benjamin Netanyahu. What impact would that have on the court proceedings, do you think?
Look, the fact is that in all the polls which were run in Israel over the last couple of years, particularly this last year, there was consistently a majority of people saying they don't trust Netanyahu, and they don't trust that in the course of the war on matters of the utmost sensitivity and importance for the national security of the State of Israel, that Netanyahu preferred there was a charge that he preferred his personal interest over the national interest of the State of Israel. Mm-hmm. And I think that the whole events now concerning his appearance in court and the efforts and the pressure that he was using against the legal system, the threats against the Attorney General, all this is somehow mixed up with the needs to take decisions about the ending of war. And therefore, I think that this is certainly contributing to the polarization which is going up in the State of Israel, and the expectation that somehow the legal process will bring about the collapse of the government.
Ehud Olmert, thank you very much. We're out of time, but thank you for your perspective. I look forward to speaking with you again. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much.
Well, what should we expect to see from a new government in Syria? Well, certainly the participation of the militia alliance Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, known as HTS, and Military Operations Administration, led by Ahmed al-Sharaa. For an understanding of the key groups who will be hoping to have a say in Syria's future, I'm joined by Aaron Weizelin, a senior fellow at the Washington Institute for Near East Policy. Aaron, thank you very much for joining the show. Let me start by asking, how would you sum up the risks and the opportunities presented by the fall of the al-Assad government?
I think there's a lot of potential trajectories that could go. We could also see different events occurring more in the western part of the country than, say, in the eastern part of the country. For now, at least in the east, we've seen that there's more fighting between the Syrian National Army backed by Turkey against the U.S.-backed Syrian Democratic Forces, and that could lead to potential destabilization. Important to remember that the Islamic State remains an insurgency in the east, as well as all the prisoners there. But in the western part of the country, in Damascus, we're seeing that HTS is already beginning to start its transitionary period in relation to meeting with former regime officials, handing it over to HTS's civilian government, the Salvation Government, and them announcing today that there will be a transition period now up until March 1st.
And Aaron, it seems that HTS is looking to be a little more governmental in its nature. What should we know about that opposition group, HTS, and its leader, Ahmed al-Sharaa, also known as Abu Muhammad al-Jawlani, in the potential new administration roles?
Yeah, so we have like a 7-year plus track record of now HTS governing through its civilian technocratic apparatus called the Syrian Salvation Government. Jolani himself has had no official role within this government. So he's essentially like an unelected official that still makes the final decisions on many things. That being said, the Salvation Government has a series of ministries like any other government. It has the Majlis al-Shura, this consultative council. It's essentially, selected by a coterie of elite men within the society, and then they kind of decide on who the ministers are. And they've been governing like most any other governments, obviously with the certain limitations of not being an official government, recognized, as well as the fact that 3/4 of its population has been displaced people. So the UN has had a large role in assisting in the IDP camps. But, one of the things that they have been doing is building up these institutions, learning from lessons of crises such as COVID-19 or the earthquake in February 2023. And we've seen that at least during the offensive, before they took Damascus, that they were starting to implement the same governance structures in Aleppo as well. And therefore, I imagine that we'll see them trying to carbon copy this now in Damascus and elsewhere in the country.
I guess it should be noted, Aaron, that the group is considered a terrorist organization by the UN, Turkey, and many Western countries, many of whom have refugees wishing to return. Do you expect that status to change?
I think that it depends on the particular country. I don't think that there will be straight across the board same answer to it. I think that of all the countries that it might happen quickest, it might be Turkey. I think then some European countries, UK, might take some time, might want to, get something out of what's going on. But I think the United States in many ways will be the most strident, just because of their past being part of the Islamic State and Al-Qaeda previously, as well as the fact that Jolani was involved in war crimes, both in Iraq before he was the leader of Jabhat al-Nusra, the predecessor to HTS, as well as within Syria itself. So I think it'll be different for all the different countries trying to potentially engage with this new government.
Well, of course, HTS is the main name being bandied around, but which are the other groups vying for influence in the future of Syria?
So we have HTS, which took over Damascus more or less. You have the remnants of the old insurgency in the south, though it seems that they more or less will be letting HTS play the role, since even though the southern offensive was the first ones to get to Damascus, HTS is now beginning the transition. But then you have the Turkish-backed SNA, which continues to fight the Kurdish-led Syrian Democratic Forces. But the thing with those two groups is that the SNA's main focus, because it is a Turkish proxy, is making sure that the Kurds are cut down to size more or less, and don't have any potential influence going forward. And then, of course, because they're a minority in the country, while the SDF has a role to play, they wouldn't be ones that would be necessarily controlling the country. The question is what kind of deal they might get with HTS and how that would be integrated into the broader country. And then there are also questions related to the remnants of the old regime and how that all factors in. Thus far, there's been a peaceful transition. One of the biggest questions is if there might be some extremist elements from the old regime and the Alawite community that decide that maybe they're not happy with any new arrangements and therefore start an insurgency of their own. But that is yet to bear out, but it's something to potentially watch for in the more medium term.
We have an interesting situation in that Turkey and the US, both of which are NATO members, support different groups in Syria. How do you expect that to be resolved by the incoming President Donald Trump?
Well, it's been an issue between the two countries going back a decade ago, since the U.S. essentially backed the SDF in its fight against the Islamic State. It's important to remember that the only reason that the U.S. is backing the SDF is because of the global coalition's fight to take territory from the Islamic State and to make sure that it doesn't come back. And there have definitely been some uncomfortable conversations between Turkish and American officials going back a decade or so related to this, because it's important to remember that a core part of the SDF is the YPG, which is essentially the Syrian branch of the PKK, which is a designated terrorist group, not only by Turkey, but also by the United States. So it's a complicated problem. At the same time, I don't think anybody wants to see ethnic cleansing against the Kurds going forward. And the SDF has been controlling the prisons and IDP IDP camps of the remnants of the Islamic State. So there are 10,000 male prisoners from the Islamic State that the SDF is holding, as well as tens of thousands of women and children related to the Islamic State still in its territory in northeast Syria. And of course, I don't think anybody wants to see that destabilized. Otherwise, you could kind of see the reemergence of the Islamic State, which of course the United States doesn't want.
Israel has been conducting airstrikes to take out the chance of weapons being used against it by extreme anti-Israeli groups. Now, what actual danger is there of that possibility?
I think in the near term, there's not a ton of danger related to it. It's more mitigating potential future risks. I think from a pragmatic level, HTS doesn't want to start a fight with Israel right now. Israel's kind of shown in the last year plus post the 10/7 attack in their response that, you know, it'd be a bit suicidal for HTS to start something right now. But I think Israel understands that given time from these past events, as well as space for HTS to potentially consolidate control, that maybe in 5 to 10 years, it could be an issue. And therefore, they're trying to get ahead of it. And because they have the freedom of movement now as a consequence of everything they've done over the last year or so, they're taking advantage of the situation to benefit their own security on the border.
Aaron, how is the balance of power, or how is the balance of power likely to change now in the region with regard to Israel and Iran?
Well, it's definitely been a big blow to Iran, not only in relation to Israel's response to the 10/7 attack and taking out a lot of Hamas's infrastructure, but also Hezbollah's infrastructure in Lebanon. And now with the falling of the Assad regime, this key cog between Tehran to Beirut has been stopped, and it will be a bit more difficult now for Iran to try and resupply and rebuild Hezbollah's capabilities in the aftermath of this alleged ceasefire between Israel and Hezbollah. And therefore, the two countries in the region, at least, that have benefited the most geopolitically speaking, are probably first Turkey and then second, possibly Israel.
Well, when we talk about balance of power, what about further afield, like Russia, for example?
Yeah, in terms of Russia, I think it's one of the more complicated questions. I think that they're relatively pragmatic. We've seen them obviously engage with the Taliban since the fall of Kabul 3+ years ago. And in many ways, I think they might look at HTS as a similar model, and therefore a country that, or a new government that they could potentially work with if they're being pragmatic to retain their interests. They want to, of course, keep a warm water port in the Mediterranean to help with all of their operations in Africa, as well as potentially harassing Europeans as well. And therefore, one of the interesting things we saw in the lead up to the offensive against the regime was that HTS put out a number of statements following November 27th, essentially saying that, while we don't agree with you doing all these airstrikes against us in the offensive, our fight really is against the regime, Iran and its Shia militia, and that we could potentially have fruitful relationships going forward if you essentially ditch the regime. And of course, we will safeguard your consular services in Aleppo, as well as any diplomatic facilities in Damascus, as well as any remaining Russian citizens that have been living in Syria. So there's clearly been some potential back channeling going on between Russia and HTS and what that could mean going forward. And at least thus far, Russia's been able to maintain its ability to have its different bases on the coast in Syria and see how that potentially plays out vis-a-vis the development of these relationships.
Well, certainly as far as the al-Assad regime, it seems that Russia and Iran were quite absent in recent times.
Yeah, I mean, part of it is that the regime really was hollowed out by a decade ago, and the Russians and Iran saved them. And yet, at the same time, over this past decade, we haven't really seen the regime build up stronger institutions, make reforms so that it would be more robust and more flexible. And in fact, it's become weaker in some ways, especially considering the fact that the economy has been torn to shreds because of the economic crisis next door in Lebanon, where Syria is using a lot of its banks to continue to try and be connected to the international system, and thus creating way more inflation in the country. And because of that, due to them not necessarily reforming internally, even though the Russians and Iranians backed the regime, there were a lot of arguments. And by the time of this offensive, and the fact that it happened so quickly, and the fact that maybe there wasn't enough time to pull off a counteroffensive, both decided that we're just going to pull the cord on this and try and regroup.
Well, as happens in quite often in the region, factions are vying for power. So what are the chances of all these groups collaborating successfully to hold elections and rebuild Syria?
I mean, it's one of the biggest questions going forward. I don't know if necessarily we'll see elections in the way that one might conceive of it in the Western context. Based off of what I know, and if past is precedent, HTS will conduct sort of internal elections amongst elite males for positions within its Majlis al-Shura, the consultative council, and then from there, a prime minister will be selected, and the prime minister will essentially decide on ministers, and the Majlis al-Shura will essentially stamp the ministers. So it wouldn't necessarily be a broad process where every Syrian would have a say in these elections, but it would likely be notables and key elites within the society that would be deciding it, at least if the model in Idlib is put upon the rest of the country. The biggest question is how scalable this model is to the rest of the country, whether they'll pivot more and become a bit more open in their system than it was in Idlib, and also how they might integrate other factions into it. And I think a lot of, there's a greater chance for the potential that the SDF and HTS can cut a deal since they aren't necessarily enemies with one another. It might be a bit more difficult with the Turkish-backed SNA because they themselves have not been really governing directly. And also have not really been focused on building a country in the same way that both HTS and the SDF have been doing in their own spheres of influence. So that might be the toughest nut to crack related to it, especially since Turkey might want to use the SNA as a card to play for more influence in the new Syria.
Well, Aaron, as a final thought, with all these factions involved inside and outside the country, how likely is the alternative scenario of another civil war in Syria?
It's really hard to say. I can see a number of potential scenarios. It's definitely possible that we might see more continued fighting more in the northeast and eastern part of the country because of the SNA and the SDF, as well as the remnant Islamic State insurgency. But I suspect that things will be relatively stable in more of the western part of the country where HTS controls. And the biggest question is how HTS can reconcile its new polity and its building up of it with the eastern part of the country.
Aaron Zolin, thank you very much for giving us your analysis on the situation there.
Thanks for having me.
It's estimated that more than 700 journalists have been killed in Syria since 2011. So imagine you're a Syrian journalist in Damascus on the day opposition forces reach the capital and the president of a despised regime flees the country. Well, that's the situation my final guest found himself in this week. Danny Mackey managed to work around power cuts and a curfew to describe the experience. Danny Mackey, thanks for making the time, especially considering the turbulent circumstances. Let's start by getting an idea of when you knew something major was happening in the country.
Well, really, when the fall of Aleppo happened, we got a big idea that something really serious was happening. We could see that an entire province falling would lead to a number of different problems in other provinces. We saw the Syrian army fled. And Assad lost basically Aleppo, Hama, Idlib, Daraa, and Suwaida in the space of around 5 days. I mean, to lose 5 of your most important provinces in 5 days is really unprecedented. That's when we kind of knew that, okay, this is heading towards Damascus. Even though Damascus and Homs fell the same evening, we expected there to be more resistance. We expected there to be a bit of a fight. But no, it was just abandoned. Syrian army just abandoned its positions. They abandoned the capital city and basically just fled for their lives. And that's something which has been a reoccurring feature over the last 2 weeks, is Syrian army just abandoning its positions.
And when did you first get a sense that the opposition forces, the Military Operations Administration, as it's called, first arrived into Damascus?
We got a sense when we heard the gunfire in the capital, and we heard that they'd arrived at the broadcasting center in Umayyad Square. Now, when they got to this center, and it was really, the old school traditional head for the media building kind of coup, when they arrived there, they actually issued a statement saying, on Syrian television, saying the regime had actually collapsed. And that was really fitting for a 60-year-old regime, that it would be done in that kind of way. Also, we heard a number of clashes. We heard reports. We could see that they were massing around the edges of the capital. And, when you've lost most of Damascus countryside and, they've actually infiltrated the center, you could see things had come to an end. But you didn't see any heavy weapons. What we saw at the start was just, militants carrying AK-47s, maximum having a couple of RPGs. We didn't see any really heavy weapons. which suggests that there wasn't a fight at all.
What's been the mood of the people on the street? Of course, we've heard reports of all the celebrations supporting the downfall of Bashar Assad. Are there any voices in support of him?
Well, absolutely not. I think Assad is, dead and buried when it comes to Syria. Even his main coastal kind of support base has pretty much abandoned him. And, why wouldn't they? This was an individual who said that, he was born in Syria and he would die in Syria. And, when push came to shove, he just upped and left the country, and he left his own security detail behind. He didn't even take them with him, which shows there were also reports that he emptied out the Syrian central bank. So this individual clearly had no concern for anything but his own interests. And him going to Russia, applying for refugee status at the end is, really fitting end to someone who has created so many refugees himself.
One of the big stories coming out is how many people have been freed from the prisons.
A number of different people, thousands, and all across Syria, tens of thousands have been released from the prisons, from Adra to Saydnaya to Aleppo, Hama. And many of these people really did nothing wrong, but maybe say a couple of words against the regime, maybe have some sort of, a couple of issues behind them. And some of these people stayed there for decades, especially the political prisoners. There were people who'd been in there since the start of the crisis. And, the Assad regime's prisons were really, slaughterhouses. So many of these locations, to actually find, hundreds of individuals was really a blessing that you could actually see them, because for the Assad regime, this was a place where people came to die. I mean, no one went into Syrian prisons to actually come out.
We heard reports that there were actually people, a large number of people, who were scheduled to be executed on the day the regime fell. It seems they basically got a last-minute reprieve.
Yeah, I mean, for them, it was definitely a miracle. And for the rest of Syria, it's been a miracle as well, because the rest of Syria was probably expected to perish within a couple of days because of the situation in the country. I mean, and when I mean that, I mean the economic situation in the country, which you have an absolutely wrecked financial system. You have a country which, everything's getting more expensive. The salaries keep getting even lower. And, when speaking from an economic sense, an entire population was struggling, to really meet any sort of need. So this was something which the Syrians needed change. They got the change they needed. And going forward, they're going to have to handle how to challenge the many issues which are going to come towards them in the future, which will be substantial and which need many sensible heads.
And there are still reports of many people being held in secret prisons underground, in bunkers, and through a tunnel network. And I guess the priority is to get to them too.
Well, clearly more effort has gone into the Syrian prison system than has gone into the actual air defense system in Syria or any of the systems in the country. And I'm sure if Assad would have put all of that money into his technological capabilities, then he probably wouldn't have collapsed in that way. But what I would definitely say is, these places were not places where you'd hold one or two people. They were places where you would hold tens of thousands of people, in a very systematic, comprehensive manner, where you'd probably keep them there for decades on end. So what we've seen from Saydnaya, especially people coming out, we've seen, women living with children, not knowing who the fathers of the children are. We've seen horrific stories. And for anyone who's actually watching, there are many people in Syria who lived under the government, who are actually supportive of the government for a period. But for many of those people, you could never speak about Saydnaya because it would earn you a one-way trip to Saydnaya itself. But looking at it now, there was nothing that most people could have done here. And in the end of the day, watching this as a Syrian, it just makes you feel that you never want to see anything similar to this happen in the country ever again.
Now, you were talking about the situation there. Of course, after the downfall of a long-reigning regime, there can often be chaos and looting and trouble on the streets. Have you seen any signs of that?
Well, so far, we've seen some counts of looting, especially on the first couple of days in areas, what I've seen around western Damascus. There were some in the east of Damascus as well. And this was mainly, kiosks, specific areas, certain government institutions. I mean, the presidential palace was looted on a number of occasions by a number of different people. I mean, you had droves of just civilians going into areas, taking out, Assad's suitcases, tables, chairs, all sorts of, anything in the palace was basically looted in the hours after the actual fall and collapse of Damascus. So we've seen that's been a widespread factor that we've seen lots of.
What's the security situation like right now? Is the public safe?
The people are generally safe. I mean, there's no clashes or any differences now on the streets, but what we are seeing is a lot of gunfire happening. Some people in Damascus, there's a curfew which starts at 4 o'clock and finishes at 5 in the morning. Also, you'd probably add that most people are still a bit concerned. They haven't all came back to their jobs, to the streets. You know, it's a bit of a difficult situation until most families are going to give it, at least 48 hours, give it a couple of days until they start going back to their daily lives, because a lot of people don't know what to expect. It's still a very fresh kind of thing. And whenever you have a power vacuum after a regime which has been here for 60 years, a lot of different things are bound to happen. There's going to be a bit of a period of instability, especially for the first couple of days. I mean, the Assads have let no one in for the last 60 years. So, it's about time that there's a bit of a change, and that change is going to have, sacrifices. And the sacrifice for the immediate future is, the immediate security situation. That will improve definitely with time.
Now, you touched on the economic situation and how bad things have been. What's the situation going forward?
Well, definitely the rebuilding process will take a lot of time, and it needs a lot of sacrifices from regional countries, especially to help Syria economically. Sanctions need to be lifted, and Syrians themselves need to really learn how to mobilize and organize themselves in a way which rebuilds the country successfully. But definitely any economic improvement would start by getting the state institutions back online, because for now there's no electricity in the country. All of the shops are really not really open again. So that's something which will have to be dealt with in the immediate future.
Now, there are reports, and we've seen pictures of large numbers of Syrians crossing the border. They're coming back into Syria from Lebanon. They're coming in from Jordan. But it seems that there are some leaving as well. What do you know about that?
Well, a lot of people are returning to the country because it's now safe again. I mean, you don't have the Assad regime. Most of these people's main issues was with the Syrian Mukhabarat or the Syrian state security or the Syrian president himself. So a lot of these people can actually technically come back into Syria and go to Damascus and go to Aleppo and celebrate with their Syrian brothers and sisters that the country's been liberated.
But what do they have to look forward to? Many of them are going to have to essentially rebuild their homes after decades outside the country.
Well, they have to look forward to ultimately not being, persecuted, not being sent to jail, not being, arrested by the Mukhabarat as soon as they enter the country. They have to look forward to is building a new Syria, and these events are really a new dawn for the country. So ultimately, they have many things to look forward to, many beautiful things. Reviving the country, its cultural side, helping improve the economy, and bringing a lot of stability to Syria again.
Those remaining from the Assad government have said that there will be a smooth transition. What do we know about Ahmed al-Shara, also known as Abu Muhammad al-Jilani, who heads the military operations administration that is now in control?
Well, definitely, he seems like he's going to be the new Minister of Defense in Syria, and he's gone from someone who was deeply unpopular in the country to someone with a lot of popularity in a very short space of time. So it may be a bit concerning for some of the minorities in the country, but so far the activities and the behavior of Hayat Tahrir al-Sham has not really given any indications that there's going to be anything negative. So potentially speaking, things look like they're going to be in a good order going forward without any specific, religious restrictions. And it seems like, especially Jilani himself, they've given us an important blueprint by their activities in Aleppo.
Well, what is the situation for the Alawites now that Bashar Assad has gone?
I mean, I've seen many statements by Hayat Tahrir al-Sham and by the rebel forces suggesting that no minorities are going to be persecuted and telling them essentially to continue their lives as it was. So I could not actually say that anything will change. We've seen no evidence of this kind of persecution so far. And I'm sure if there is, people will write about it and talk about it. But for now, it seems that things are going in a positive direction.
You talked about the police and army dropping their uniforms and going into civilian clothing. What is the role of the police and the army right now? Are they even trusted?
There is no police and army at the moment. And that's the main point. I mean, you're really going to have to build a police force to build an army again with the new transitional government. And that's something which will ultimately take time. And you're going to need individuals who have history in the country to really come together and help out with that, because you need civil servants in state institutions. And that's something where you're going to have to use people who were previously in the old regime who can help keep this machine ticking. but in the positive way, so that electricity comes, so that things become, open again, so that people have confidence again.
Now, Danny, I know you specialized in Syria's relationship with Iran and with Russia, and it seems that Iran and Russia were not around much as Bashar al-Assad's regime was falling. Presumably they're preoccupied with their own other issues. But what is the situation with those countries going to be like now going forward?
Well, both of them have actually issued statements saying they respect the will of the Syrian people, and the authorities here have actually issued a number of statements saying that nothing will change and that they will continue to support any relations with external factors, including Russia and Iran. So this was basically been, Assad's kind of death sentence politically was, the fact that Russia and Iran didn't come back into the fold, and the fact that the opposition have reached kind of out to the Iranians and the Russians saying, look, we want relations in the future. Let's see where this goes.
Now, the fall of the Assad regime was very fast, as the world has witnessed. How long will it take for Syria to come back together again and for the people to unite?
Well, this will take a number of years. It's not going to happen overnight. And as long as the Syrian people remain on, then ultimately they will get there in the end, everyone working together.
Oh, Danny, I think we've lost you there. Are you okay?
I'm literally going to have to go.
No, totally understood. You stay safe, Danny, and thank you for making the time. Well, it's a shame we had to cut short our conversation with Danny Mackie, who's there in Damascus, witnessing and documenting firsthand the dramatic changes in Syria. But we'll no doubt have a chance to reconnect with him at some point as this story continues to develop. And that's it for this episode of the show. I'm Riz Khan. From me and the team, thanks for watching. We'll see you soon.
At Arabiya News, we go beyond the headlines.
From the latest breaking news to in-depth coverage of global events.
We're not bought or sold. Nobody owns us.
The loss of life, the destruction of property. The conflicts are such a terrible thing.
Context and analysis to help you see the full picture.
The world is in a very dangerous place.
Join us on al-Arabiya News.
It's very impressive.
Where knowledge meets perspective.
Hello and welcome to Global News Today, bringing you exclusive insights and fresh perspectives from leading experts and influential decision makers every weekday here on Al-Arabiya News. I'm Tom Burges Watson. Coming up on today's programme, 4 days since the fall of Syria's former President Bashar al-Assad, shops begin reopening, people return to work, and the dust is settling across the country. We examine the daily reality for the Syrian people. A message from Syria's new leader, Ahmad al-Shara. He says, don't worry about the future of Syria. Syrians are fed up with the war, and their biggest fear, Bashar al-Assad, is now gone. Israel says it has destroyed most of Syria's military hardware and most of Syria's strategic weapons stockpiles during the course of the last 48 hours. Plus, we take a look back at the 13 and a half years of turmoil in Syria with photojournalist Paul Conroy, who was with the Sunday Times war correspondent Marie Colvin when she was killed in the city of Homs back in 2012. Hello and welcome to the programme. 4 days have now passed since the fall of the former Syrian President Bashar al-Assad, who ruled the Arab nation for nearly 25 years. With him gone, calm appears to be settling over the capital, Damascus, and people are now returning to the markets in the Souk al-Hamadiyah and on the streets of Damascus. Homegrown NGOs are helping to clean up the city. Well, on the political front, Syria's new leader, Ahmad al-Shara, head of the armed group that overthrew the Syrian government, appears to be trying to send reassuring messages to the world from the capital, Damascus. He's urging foreign governments not to worry about the future of the country, stating that Syria was, quote, not ready for another war. He has also further emphasized that the real source of fear had been the Syrian regime, which is now gone. Plus, he's pointing to the fact that Iranian militias and Hezbollah had been another source of concern. Well, for a quick political recap for the benefit of our viewers, Syria's opposition forces, led by the country's new leader Ahmed al-Shara, have appointed Mohammed al-Bashir as the transitional head of government. Well, he's going to maintain that post until the 1st of March. Well, Bashir is pledging to restore stability and calm just 2 days after the ousting of the longtime President Bashar al-Assad. He's also stated that one of his primary goals is to, quote, bring back the millions of Syrian refugees living abroad. Well, for more analysis, we're joined now by Lord Andrew Robotham, who is the former UK Armed Services Minister under Prime Minister David Cameron. Thank you very much indeed for speaking to us. A brand new chapter for Syria, it would appear. Mohammed al-Bashir is the new interim Prime Minister, and the Syrian people are expecting great things from their new leaders. Are they going to be able to deliver, do you think?
Well, I am by nature an optimist, so I'll be optimistic. But there are quite a few hurdles in the way, and there's also some rather poor precedent in, for instance, Iraq and Libya. However, this hasn't been done by foreign troops, which I think is a great thing, although the Turks are now apparently attacking the Kurds in the northeast. So I am an optimist. I think we need to see how things pan out. But all the words coming out of the leader are actually good ones. He's saying he wants conciliatory action, he wants freedom, he wants freedom of religion, and no vengeance. This is all going to be quite difficult to deliver, and there are a lot of groups in Syria who are quite worrying. I was in the Ministry of Defense when the Syrian civil war broke out, 2011-12, and we talked about it quite a lot at the time, and indeed then it looked as though Assad would be overthrown then. But I am quite optimistic. The people of Syria are very tired of the war, very tired of repression. So I hope they won't now fall upon each other, be they Alawite or Christian or Shia or Sunni or whatever they may be. I hope they won't fall upon each other. I hope they'll all live relatively in harmony, in freedom, and live their own lives without interference from others.
So clearly some enormous challenges for the new leadership. I mean, what would you say are the top priorities for these new leaders presiding over a country that's been in the hands of one family for more than half a century, that's currently in many places in ruins?
Well, I think first of all, they have to establish law and order, and it appears that the looting in Damascus may have ended. But they need to establish law and order, and that involves the police and indeed, to a lesser extent in Syria, the people that were in the armed forces. I mean, I'm not quite sure about that because I think most have been rounded up or fled. But the police who were served, of course, Assad, need to be kept in place until they are proved to be in some way criminals. Because otherwise you will have the situation they had in Baghdad when the Second Gulf War, when chaos reigned, complete chaos. So you need stability, you need police force. The soldiers that have taken overthrown Assad can contribute to that, of course, and could indeed be the beginning of a proper police force. But we must have law and order first, because otherwise it'll be mayhem and there'll be old scores being settled. People won't be able to go about their business or lives properly.
The new Prime Minister, al-Bashir, ran the Salvation government in a small pocket of northwestern Syria. I mean, a lot of people will be asking, does he have the right credentials?
I can honestly say I don't know anything about him. But look, if you've had one family in power, and the father was even worse than the son, frankly, if you know the history of Homs, how it was bombed to obliteration back in the 80s, I think. If you've had one family in power, two dictators, everybody has dirty hands because they had to survive. So they will all have been in some way tarnished by including a lot of the rebel fighters, tarnished by the association with the regime. That is inevitable. So one has to be conciliatory and accept that. I mean, there are analogies with 1945 in Germany as well, of course, where actually we took the police force, Hitler's police force, and they enforced law and order, under the Allies who captured Berlin, of course. But this is better because actually it's not involving foreign troops, apart from possibly the Turks, which is a matter of concern if you're a Kurd.
And another parallel with 1945 and Germany is, of course, Syria's finances. We've heard from the new Prime Minister. He said, quote, "We have no foreign currency, and as for loans and bonds, we're still collecting data. So, yes, financially, we're very bad," he said. I mean, do you think the international community will help Syria, and with what sorts of conditions?
Well, my first point was law and order. My second point would be the economy as a whole, so that people can live and just rather than just surviving. Will the international community help? I think the international community will want to help, but the condition will be that we're not helping a sort of al-Qaeda proxy. And that is what I think the new leadership in Damascus realizes, because actually what we would like in the West is preferably democratic, but I think we should be aware of trying to impose that on people, but a free society and a free economy. So I think we should be helping there. I'm not sure what the attitude of the new leadership is towards Israel, but of course Israel definitely has a dog in this fight, as does Turkey. And it is partly because Israel has obliterated Hezbollah and Hamas to a large extent that this revolution has taken place.
Indeed, and you mentioned international help and the sorts of conditions that could be attached. But I mean, the group in charge there in Syria, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, is designated as a terrorist organization, not just by the UK, but I should add by the US, the EU, Turkey, and others. Do you think removing them from that list and removing that designation would be a step towards being better positioned to actually provide the help?
Well, I think we'll have to see. But governments change, and governments change their minds. Don't forget, Archbishop Makarios was designated a terrorist in Cyprus in the 50s, and he went on to be Prime Minister of Cyprus. Mugabe, okay, he was a shocking man, actually, but he had been a terrorist beforehand. Nelson Mandela, a better argument, was a terrorist and was locked up for being a terrorist for planting bombs in South Africa, and became a figure of peace. So I think people can change, and I think if the government sees, I mean, I can't speak for this government, if the government sees decent policies put in place, then I'm sure that they will lift the prohibition on dealing with this group.
Okay, so that's the international community and the support it might offer to the new leadership in Syria. But one country we haven't talked about is Russia, which has maintained a significant military presence in Syria for a long time now. And, of course, Russia supported the administration of Bashar al-Assad and his father. Do you see the new leadership in Syria wanting to perhaps find a way to work with Russia, or do you think they'll want them out of their country?
Well, I've never met these people. I think they'll want them out of their country because it was Russia that helped and launched a lot of the barrel bombs. I don't know whether they were involved in the chemical weapons that Assad used. I think they will have, at the very least, a huge degree of skepticism about any offer they get from Russia, which is, of course, to our benefit in the West, because Putin has been using his bases in Syria, the Tartus and the air base, to assist him in his battles in Ukraine. And we need to weaken him further for our point of view, for our benefit. And I hope that the new leadership in Syria will not negotiate any deals with the Russians. I rather think they won't, actually, not least because Assad is lurking in Moscow.
Indeed, he is. What do you think will happen to him? What would you like to see happen to Bashar al-Assad?
Well, I would like to see him tried in Syria for his crimes. I don't have a huge amount of confidence in the International Criminal Court, although I'm sure they could try him. I don't think the Russians will be keen on letting a dictator that is deposed get into clutches of any law and order agency, be it Syrian or international. because Putin would see that as a precedent. My view is that this weakens Putin a lot. How much we will see over the coming weeks and months.
Obviously, a new administration coming to power in Washington in the weeks ahead. Donald Trump's got a Middle East peace envoy, or Middle East envoy, I should say, Massad Boulos, whose job is looking increasingly complex with each passing day. I'm just wondering whether you think, from Washington's point of view, with everything that's happened in the Middle East in the last couple of months, do you think they're seeing this as being a real opportunity and a real turning point for the whole region?
Well, again, I can't speak for the new administration or indeed the old one, the passing one of Biden. But what I would say about Trump is his foreign policy in his first administration was not bad. It really wasn't bad. He achieved some things. I can't speak for his domestic policies because I don't really know. But he rightly, in my opinion, said this agreement about nuclear weapons with Iran is not going to go anywhere because Iran will just lie. I think he will be pleased to see the Iranians kicked out of Syria, of course. I think he will be keen on seeing a new administration there, but he doesn't want America to get too involved. And I understand that. The last thing you want is foreign troops sitting in Syria becoming a target themselves, as happened in both Iraq and Afghanistan.
And just lastly, we're going to be talking about this a bit more later in the programme, but obviously Israel has a border with Syria and is watching the situation with considerable interest and is taking action preemptively. What do you make of the action being taken by Israel across Syria, and what do you think that says to us about how they view the new leadership there?
Well, I suspect Israel is as wary as everybody else is of the new leadership. I mean, I hope they're optimistic too, but what they've been doing, I understand from media reports, is they've been destroying weapons dumps and things so that they don't fall into the hands of Islamist terrorists, of whom there are certainly a fair number in Syria. I hope they're not in the government, the new government of Syria, but I don't know.
Just lastly, your thoughts as to where you see Syria heading to. What's your prognosis?
Well, as I said to you earlier, I'm an optimist. I think that if this new regime turns out to be relatively small L liberal and allows people to get on with their lives and does not seek conflict, and they've said they certainly don't, with their neighbours, I think there could be a good outcome in Syria, which has laboured under various foreign occupiers for years. I mean, the French were there, if you may recall, before the Second World War, and I think, things have been bad in Syria for a long time. So let's hope things get better. And I think we can only sit on our hands and watch. And I think humanitarian aid is of course useful if necessary, but in the long term, I think economic aid and support will. The Syrians are very enterprising people. Sweeping generalization, but a lot of them are very enterprising. And I think given the opportunity, they can make a go of their own country.
Okay, well, thank you very much indeed for taking the time to speak to us, Lord Andrew Robertson. Thank you very much for your time. Meanwhile, the Israeli military has conducted some 500 strikes during the past couple of days on strategic military targets inside Syria. This comes just within days of the ouster of Bashar al-Assad. Well, Israel has struck the ports of al-Baida and also Latakia, where 15 Syrian vessels were docked. Well, in a statement, the Israeli Defense Minister Israel Katz said that the aim was to destroy strategic capabilities that could pose a threat to the state of Israel. Well, we're joined now by Brigadier General Yossi Kupavasa, former head of the research division at the IDF's Intelligence Corps, as well as the Director General of the Ministry of Strategic Affairs. Thank you very much indeed for joining us, sir. During your military service, you served as, amongst other positions, Central Command Intelligence Officer, also the Intelligence Attaché to the United States. You also participated in the Yom Kippur War and the First Lebanon War. Extremely rich experience. I'd like to start by asking you first, doesn't look like the United States or Israel foresaw Bashar al-Assad's ouster. Did you foresee it, or did it take you by surprise as well?
No, personally, I was not taken by surprise. first of all, good afternoon. I was not taken by surprise because what I heard throughout the last couple of months from people with connections in the Syrian, what used to be opposition, was that they are eager to see more strikes of Israel against the Iranian-led Axis, and that creates the appetite for them to launch an attack against the Assad regime. And so I was not surprised with and they were quite convinced that the opposition is going to have the upper hand if it launches such an attack. So it wasn't a surprise. Nevertheless, I was surprised with the easiness with which they have managed to get rid of the Assad regime. That was some surprise of the way it was done.
You've been quoted in the media as saying that what we've witnessed is the beginning of the fall of the Iranian axis of evil. So it seems that you think that the fall of Bashar al-Assad has got some pretty far-reaching consequences.
For sure. I think that what we have done with Hamas and Hezbollah were steps in the direction of bringing about the collapse of the Iranian-led evil axis of evil. And the fall of Assad is actually putting an end to the dream of an axis, because Assad was critical for having the ability for the Iranians to act as if they have an axis. Now, without Assad, they cannot reach Lebanon, and this means that Hezbollah is going to witness and experience very difficult times in the coming months, and it's not going to be able to rearm and regroup. And everybody looks at Hezbollah now as very weak, and I think that they should expect more pressure put on them from within Lebanon and from Syria. So it's very bad news for Hezbollah, and they cannot reach Hamas either. And although Hamas has mixed feelings about what happened, but the Iranians cannot reach them as they used to in the past. And it's a very difficult situation for the Iranian axis. And I think Iran is in a state of shock with what has happened in 3 months, from dreaming about becoming the hegemon power in the Middle East, putting pressure on Israel to the point that Israel will be encircled and it will create the possibility of wiping it off the map. Now it's about the tables have turned, and it's about not only the ability to maintain the axis, which is already very deeply hurt, but also about the question of whether Iran would be able to sustain the Iranian regime is going to be able to sustain control of Iran itself.
Sure. And I mean, as you say, an extremely surprising sequence of events these last 3 months, extremely damaging for Iran. But specifically on the question of Syria, the Israeli Prime Minister seems to be suggesting that Israel deserves some credit for the downfall of Bashar al-Assad. Do you agree with him?
In the sense that Israel has created the conditions that made it possible for the opposition to launch the attack, yes, Israel played a role in it. I think that some credit should go also to the fact that the Russians were very busy with Ukraine, and to the fact that the Trump effect is already felt in the Middle East, and that Turkey should get some credit for the preparations they did with the opposition forces. It's not all done by Israel, but Israel was the one thing that made a difference in the last couple of months. That's credit that is well deserved by Israel for what they did, what we did. And I think that, put it this way, if Israel didn't change its attitude towards Hezbollah and hit it so hard, I doubt if the rebels would have taken the initiative.
I just want to ask you, I mean, obviously Israel has carried out, we gather, some 500 airstrikes during the last couple of days on Syrian territory. The Israeli journalist and diplomatic correspondent Amichai Stein is quoted as saying that Israeli officials were told on Sunday not to give interviews on the subject of Syria. And I'm just wondering why you think, well, first of all, do you think this is true? And if so, why do you think there's secrecy, or there was secrecy in the immediate aftermath of Assad's fall, surrounding Israel's view of these developments?
I don't know if it's true or not, but judging by what's happening on the ground, it looks as if it was true, because we don't see many officials ready to be interviewed on the subject. But and I think that the principle here is that you never regret something you never said. So let's keep quiet and do the job, and let our actions speak for themselves.
So what are your actions? What is Israel doing with this buffer zone in the area adjoining the Golan Heights? What's Israel up to here?
Well, we are taking the necessary steps to protect ourselves against any kind of eventuality that can emerge in Syria. Nobody knows where Syria is going now. We can be optimistic and believe that the Syrian new regime will focus on improving the living conditions in Syria and providing full rights to the citizens of Syria, and finding a way to share the responsibilities between the different factions and the sects that comprise the Syrian people, and will really focus on having a better life for the Syrians. That is something that we all hope to see, and if it happens, that's wonderful. And Israel extends a hand for cooperation, as it did during the civil war, and we are ready to help. And as the Prime Minister said, if we see an extended hand from the Syrian side, we shall definitely come to their support. At the same time, we know that some elements within the Syrian new regime are extremists, and even though they are trying now to pretend that they are less extreme than they have been in the past, and it could be true, we have to judge them by their actions. Even though they do have some tendency to extremism, and we have to make sure that if this is the way they choose, if this is the path they choose, they won't be able to use the huge amounts of strategic arms that they could have put their hand on if they so decide. So we took the necessary steps first to protect ourselves along the Golan Heights by moving into the buffer zone. And the other move that we did was to eliminate the weaponry and the production capabilities of the Syrian that are on Syrian soil. And by that solve the problem. We have to remember, we still have this memory of what has happened in Libya after the ousting of Gaddafi, when the weapons arsenal that was there was delivered for all kinds of radical and extremist organizations around the Middle East, and caused a lot of damage to people of the Middle East. So I think everybody should thank us for depriving the radical elements in Syria from having the capability to own these weapons.
Well, Russia doesn't sound very happy about what Israel is doing on Syrian territory, extremely angered by these Israeli strikes on Syria. And of course, Russia's got this military presence inside Syria with the port and the landing strip up in the north. I mean, there's a risk, isn't there, of a miscalculation by Israel and hitting some of Russia's assets. What would happen if that were to occur?
This is not going to occur. First of all, we have very good coordination for many years with the Russians, just to make sure that we don't hit their forces. And we tell them in advance that when we carry out an attack, well, it's in the last minute maybe, but enough time to avoid friction with the Russians. And anyhow, they are leaving Syria, and, so it's not a problem. And the fact is that we conducted hundreds of sorties of airstrikes in Syria in the last couple of days, and there was no problem with the Russians, so I don't think that they have to worry about that. They don't like that potential allies of them are going to not be able to take control of these weapons, but they will overcome it.
The Supreme Leader of Iran has accused the United States and Israel of conspiring to overthrow Bashar al-Assad. What do you say to that?
It's of course baseless, and Israel was not a party to these decisions by the rebels. These rebels are closer to Hamas than they are close to Israel, or at least some of them. The Hayat Tahrir Sham and some other groups within the Syrian opposition that led the attack are friendly with Hamas and not with Israel. So it's ridiculous. And definitely the United States has nothing to do with it either, in my mind. So it's the Iranians simply have to explain why they failed and why they didn't come to the rescue of Assad, and they would blame anybody for their mischiefs and lack of capability to help a friend that they were committed to its survival for so many years. And of course, many questions are asked towards the Iranian leadership, and they don't have good answers. So the best way to handle such a situation is to blame Israel and the United States.
There are some who say in Israel, some commentators suggesting that perhaps after more than 50 years in power, Assad family rule was, to some extent, Israel's preferred option. Do you think there's any truth in this, that perhaps the Assad regime was a known quantity and it's preferable to something unknown in your backyard?
Well, I would say the following. It was not that terrible that it forced us to do something about it. We were more worried about the fact that the Assad regime allows the Iranians to operate from within Syrian territory and to use Syrian territory in order to deliver arms to Hezbollah. That was something that we were concerned with, and allow the Iranians to use the Syrian territory in order to infiltrate into Jordan and from there to the Judea and Samaria areas under the Palestinian control, and so on and so forth. This was our concern. The Syrians themselves, as a military, we warned them again and again not to allow the Iranians and the Hezbollah to operate from their territory, and we took a lot of action in order to prevent that from happening. We carried out numerous attacks on Iranian assets and even against Syrian assets along the last couple of years, actually the last 10 years. That was the case. We didn't like Assad, but we didn't consider his presence there as a reason to take action or to oust him. And we don't use this kind of policy of removing regimes from power. It was up to the Syrian people to remove him from power, and they did it eventually. It took them a lot of time. They didn't succeed in the beginning, but eventually they managed to do that. And our preferred option is that the Syrian people will decide for himself what kind of policy and what kind of order of priorities they have and what kind of national identity they want to have and how they're going to overcome the different opinions within the Syrian people. This is all up to them to decide. We wish, I think, that their decision will be that they want to cooperate with Israel and build friendly relationships and good neighborhood between us and them. We believe that if this is going to be the way they choose, there's an awful lot to gain for both sides. Definitely for Syria, if they open their hands and arms for us to help them build Syria. They have such a huge mission in front of them in reconstructing the totally destroyed land, that beautiful land that they have, and we can be very helpful in this if they choose. But they can choose also to confront us. That's another option. Inside the Syrian new government, there are forces that prefer the first option. There are forces that prefer the second option. It's up to the Syrian people to decide what is the preferred way to the future.
Okay. Well, thank you very much indeed. We really appreciate you taking the time to speak to us today. Brigadier General Yossi Kuperwasser, thank you.
Thank you.
Now we're going to turn our attention to the journalists who have documented the turmoil in Syria over the years. Well, our special guest today is the renowned war photographer Paul Conroy, who gave us a front row view of the Syria civil war in 2012 through his camera lens. Well, Paul is with us today to reflect on the fall of Bashar al-Assad more than 13 years after the Syrian government severely injured him and killed his colleague, the veteran Sunday Times reporter Mary Colvin, and the French photographer Rémi Ochlik. This in Baba Amr, on the edge of the Syrian city of Homs. Paul, thank you very much indeed for being with us. Many of us have been taken by surprise at events in Syria, especially the speed at which they unfolded the last few days. What's been your reaction to what's happened there during the last 10 days or so?
Equally as surprised, I think. Everyone who's been involved in Syria, reports from there, was watching with interest because of Russia's situation and Hezbollah's situation, the Iranian issues with Israel. But I don't think any of us really saw this coming and happening so fast. I'm in Odessa at the moment, and I'm kind of going through 4-hourly power cuts. And over the last few days, it seemed like every time I got back online to get more information, another city had fallen. So I'm as astonished, but I'm as pleased as anyone can be, you know, for the Syrians, after 54 years of Assad family rule, to have that, throw that yoke off. I can't really put it into words how happy I am for them.
And as you watched these developments unfold and you saw the opposition forces making progress in Aleppo, then in Hama, then in Homs, did you find yourself having to manage your own expectations in case this was another false start?
Absolutely. You know, we've seen over the years, you know, rebel events. I think it was 2016, 17. It looked like the regime may fall, and then the Russians stepped in particularly with their air force, and managed to push back the tide. So yeah, it's certainly in the early days. You know, Aleppo going was a huge shock. You know, it was like, wow, that is a major gain. And I kind of thought that maybe they'd consolidate their positions in Aleppo, and then it would be a grinding push down the road, you know, quite savage. But then, you know, we saw them kind of almost get Aleppo and then immediately move on to Hama. And as they advanced, your expectations and hopes grew. But there was also a part saying, be careful, you know, we didn't know if the regime were going to make a big stand at Hama. But then Hama went, and then Homs, you know, which is of particular interest to me. Homs became the focus. And that's when that's when the nerves really kicked in because of mine and Maria's connection to Homs and what happened there. And then, you know, Homs, and then almost immediately Damascus. You know, it was I won't say comical, but I was just, what? You know, because I'd come out of a blackout and check my phone again and go, oh, Hama's gone on the road to Homs. Stunning.
Extraordinary events, as you say. Let's cast our eye back to the 22nd of February 2012 and stay in Homs. Just tell us what happened on that day.
Well, the previous day to the 22nd, the situation had gotten so bad. A lot of the people who'd taken us in had been killed. A lot of the FSA guys who got us into Homs have been killed. And the media centre workers, the journalists and the activists who were reporting from this one media centre we were based in, you know, every time they went out, someone seemed to get killed. So it reached its peak of shelling, just 24-hour-a-day shelling. And that day, me and Maria had the conversation, and I said, I really don't see how we're going to be able to file another piece. You know, I think we've overcooked things. So let's do some TV interviews. Let's, you know, show the world what's happening now. We had access to a satellite link. So we did interviews with the BBC, Channel 4, and then finally with Anderson Cooper on CNN. And that was about midnight. And Marie told a story of a tiny baby who died from shrapnel wounds to the stomach. We kind of went to lay down in the back room, small back room, the media centre, with the intention of getting up and going back to the field hospital the next day. But about 6 a.m., two huge explosions rocked the building, which woke everyone up. Everyone was asleep on the floor. There were about 20 people in there. And then, say, 30 seconds later, another 2 shells landed. And at this point, I was ex-artillery, British artillery, so I understood fire patterns and what was happening. And they were walking shells into the media towards the media centre. 30 seconds later, what I expected to happen happened. something hit the back of the building, and then something hit the top of the building, and there was just chaos at that point. And then I think it was the third shell. Marie and Remy Oshlik, a French photographer, were making for the door. And they got just by the door, and the shell landed just outside and killed them instantly. I didn't fall over, but I something had hit me, and I kind of checked myself and put my hand on my leg, and my hand just went straight through my leg and came out the other side. And I knew my tourniquet had been blown up as well, all the medical kit. So I just wrapped a scarf around and made a makeshift tourniquet. And then they kept shelling for about another 15 minutes then. And eventually they grabbed me from in the rubble, pulled me back inside the building because the front of the building had gone at this point. And then they took me, and threw me in the back of a truck and took me to the field hospital where Dr. Mohammed, an amazing doctor who'd stayed in homes to treat people, he kind of patched me up and got me stabilised.
I mean, it's an incredibly traumatic experience that you went through, an extremely tragic one as well, because you lost, as you said, colleagues of yours that you work with, notably Marie Colvin. And it sounds from what you're saying as well, like you feel like you were specifically targeted by the regime of Bashar al-Assad. Why do you think he wanted to do that?
I think it was a simple case of kill the messenger. The message we got out in our pieces for the Sunday Times, and also on them interviews, was a tale of slaughter. They were just slaughtering. The only people in that neighborhood, really, there were a few Free Syrian Army, but it was mostly civilians. What we were seeing was civilians being ripped to pieces by Assad's artillery, and we were getting that message out from the spot, which I think offended them. And I could tell, just by the fire pattern, most of the artillery attacks in Bab al-Amr at that point, they would just rather lazily shell the neighborhood. But when that attack started, there was very precise artillery work. It was professional. They did the 2 location shots. We suspect they had a drone overhead adjusting the fire. And just by the nature of the attack, I always said it was targeted. And then subsequently, Marie's sister Kat worked for many years, we all did, on gathering evidence. And we eventually found a paper trail back to the regime, back to the people who planned the attack, what they got in return, cars, money. And Kat won a case in the American courts where the judge said specifically Marie was assassinated for her journalism.
Bashar al-Assad, therefore, the person at the pinnacle of the organisation, the regime that tried to kill you and succeeded in killing many others, notably, as we've been saying, Marie Colvin. He's now in Russia. He's been given asylum there. What would you like to see happen to him?
I think, one of the biggest things that myself and every Syrian could possibly want is some form of accountability. We hoped, but we knew it was a bit of a faint hope that he would, he's not the kind of character who would do a last stand in Damascus. The odds were always on that he'd escape. But of course, with hopefully with more evidence gathered once they get into the government buildings, and certainly the Muhakhbarat and the secret services, there's a lot of evidence out there. In an ideal world, international arrest warrants, and then in a perfect world, see him in a dock. I think that would be the biggest gift to the Syrian people, for justice to be seen to be done.
Let's talk a little bit more about Marie Colvin. You had a really close working relationship with her. She had a really formidable reputation, didn't she? 'Cause she lost an eye during a grenade attack in Sri Lanka in 2001, hence the eye patch that was sort of so iconic, a signature sort of feature when you think about her. Just tell us, what was she like?
She was quite amazing. I mean, I met her in Syria, ironically, in 2003. And she was just this. I just tried to break into Iraq by making my own boat. And she found out about this. I got captured and arrested and eventually released, but she found out about this. And I was just, first time I met her, I was sat in a bar at the hotel in Syria. And she just came in, she just stood there silhouetted by the door, really cinematic entrance. And she was just stood there and went, who and where is the boatman? And I kind of, into me, and she just wrote them. She went, Marie Colvin, Sunday Times, can I buy you a whiskey? And I was like, yes, you can. But she was a force of nature, and you know, I loved what we did. You know, Marie and her journalism was very much people focused, and focused on the people who more often than not have the least say in any war situation, which is women and children. So that was always our focus when we worked together. She really, you know, there are experts who talk about the military situation and the weapons being used, and that is a form of journalism. Marie was very much get me to the families, get me to the people, and that's, you know, that's why we were in Bab al-Amra. That's why we're in that part of Homs, because there were 25,000 women and kids there, and that's what she wanted, and pretty much nothing would stop her. You know, we crawled through a 3 mile long sewer tunnel to get into Homs. That was how dedicated she was to the story. Force of nature.
Yeah, I mean, a force of nature is how you describe her. Other people who worked with her said, you know, she was not necessarily always the easiest person to work with, and that was also probably by her own admission as well. But it sounds like you really managed to hit it off.
She used to give people the slip quite often. If it wasn't working, the foreign desk would get a call saying, I've lost her, she's gone. And she'd send them one way and she'd go the other way. So yeah, it was a relief that we got on so well, you know, because we spent a lot of time in situations like that. And we had the same dark humour, which helped.
What do you think she'd make of what's happened in Syria these last few days?
I think I wouldn't be sitting in Odessa if Marie was with us now. I would be long ago on the way there. I think it would be bittersweet. Of course, she would be elated to see the Syrian people taste the freedom. I think the bitter part of it would be seeing Assad slope off to Russia. You know, that would grate on her nerves.
You say that Bashar al-Assad tried to silence the media, tried to silence you. He failed to silence you. But one of the techniques he used was he had this team of propagandists who peddled a very different narrative about what was happening in Syria. Some of them were foreign. One was British, notably, another Canadian. They're still at it, actually. I've been looking at their Twitter feeds. But how effective do you think they were in distorting people's understanding of the civil war in Syria?
I think they were actually quite effective. And then, you know, can I name them? Because I know exactly who you're talking about. You know, Vanessa Beeley and Eve Bartlett and a couple of others really did pump out this pro-regime message. And as I always said, their objective was not to convince anyone of anything in particular. It was just to muddy the waters so much that people didn't know what was true. You know, and that's the, you know, we have a burden of proof as journalists. We have to, you know, stand by it, verify it, and you know, put your name to that. With these people who really, really did go full regime, their only job was to muddy the waters. And I used to get people back home who knew my history with Syria, who would say to me things like, "Are the white helmets jihadists?" And I would be annoyed, but I would be like, why do you even think that? You know, I've told you 1,000 times, you know, no. But these people did muddy the waters so much without any burden of proof. It was just keep pumping this river of bilge onto the internet, into the newspapers, and it was successful. I think, you know, it's been tried again here in Russia, and I don't think it's been as successful. I think people have seen through that now, but you know, the fact that they're still at it, I was looking at some of the things that she's been writing lately, and just astonishing how far they will go in the name of a bad cause.
Indeed. We've got to let you go fairly soon. Just lastly, I want to ask you, you know, obviously events of 2012 are going to be with you for the rest of your life. Seems like you're going to carry on having really strong links with Syria moving forwards. Are you optimistic about the country's future?
I am actually, and I'll tell you, I know there's a lot of people going, oh, what happens now? Yeah, what everyone has to remember is the Syrian people have had 54 years of brutal dictatorial rule. When they had the uprising in 2011-12, they were not standing there in Homs, in all of the major cities, calling for any form of draconian Sharia law. They were out there protesting. They wanted, you know, a liberation of the constitution, more rights to vote. They weren't after that. And I think if anyone comes in now, and I think, you know, the HTS have seen, they tried in Idlib with the hard line. It didn't work. The Syrian people didn't want it. And I think anyone who now tries to force upon the Syrian people another form of draconian hardline law will be given short shrift. I just don't think they will manage it. I think they need all the help they can get to make a democracy happen. But, you know, it does involve letting the Syrians now decide their future. And, you know, it's been plagued by foreign powers, with, you know, certainly Hezbollah, Iran and Russia have been very bad for Syria. I think now the Syrians will decide, and they won't have it forced upon them. They know how to resist this now. It won't happen again.
OK, well, thank you very much indeed for your time. Photojournalist Paul Conroy, thank you for your time.
Yes.
That is all we have time for on Global News today. Thank you very much indeed for watching. Be sure to join us again tomorrow for more exclusive interviews. Until then, goodbye.
From the White House to Gaza, Kiev to Beijing, elections, economics and the environment compete with conflicts and other complex issues for our attention. In an age of fake news, deep fake and artificial intelligence,
they've got to have a vote and a say.
It's important to look beyond the loudest voice to understand the truth. From newsmakers to groundbreakers,
my campaign is going very well.
Presidents, prime ministers, princes and peacemakers, and cultural tastemakers.
As Arabs, as Middle Eastern, we're too emotional.
Join me on the Riz Khan Show for empowering conversation.
Prime Minister, I'd like to kick off by asking you to walk us through how you see the election of Donald Trump playing out in this part of the world, and specifically what it means for your government.
Well, thank you for this opportunity. Obviously, we congratulate the United States for having a successful election. This is a decision for the American people to decide what kind of a government they want. But obviously, as you said, a decision made in the United States have an effect on the globe and definitely on our region as well. We've had an experience with the previous government of President Trump. And this time also, we are hoping that the U.S. administration is going to maintain good relations with the region, with Iraq, and in particular with the Kurdistan region that's been a very credible partner with the United States in the fight against terrorism and also in promoting peace and developing the shared values and principles that we have with each other. It's a little premature to decide how it will play out. We have to wait until the whole cabinet is picked and decided, but we definitely have friends among people that we hear are being considered to be in the next government.
So you're seeing encouraging signs so far?
Well, I would like to be optimistic, yes.
In your mind, when you take a step back and think about what happens next, obviously it's difficult to foresee the next couple of years, but President-elect Trump has said that he will end all the conflicts happening right now in the world, and he specifically mentioned that in the Middle East and those in Europe. Do you believe that that's an achievable goal?
Well, I hope that there will be peaceful solutions to every ongoing conflict and war. However that's achieved, I believe it will serve the people of those countries that are suffering from the ongoing wars now. But I hope that these decisions are made in consultation with the parties involved, that the interests of the people are going to be taken into account. I don't know how this is going to be done. We hear that through force, peace can be promoted. Maybe that's the policy of this new administration. We have to wait and see. But in any case, we do believe that peace is going to be better than war anyway.
Are you worried about the possibility that Baghdad will be drawn into this conflict? We've already seen overt and behind the closed doors pressure coming from Israel towards Baghdad.
Of course we are worried and we are concerned about what's happening. We don't want Iraq to be dragged into this war. We don't think that this is an Iraqi war. We believe that if Iraq can play a constructive, positive role in promoting peace and bringing sides together, that's good. But to add fuel to the fire and to make things more complicated, to expand the war and conflict, it's not going to be in the best interest of the Iraqi people. And I hope that the Iraqi government will look at the interest of the Iraqi people more than the interest of anyone else.
President-elect Trump has made no secret of his support for Israel and its government, particularly its Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, a man who has just been sanctioned by the International Criminal Court. Do you believe that will be a barrier to peace?
Well, I don't know, but I believe that any step towards promoting peace must be supported, and anything that distracts peace or any initiative should be reconsidered. So I don't know exactly how this is going to play out, but I do believe that the players must come to some agreement that there must be different ways of reaching a sustainable solution to the ongoing conflicts.
Walk me through this one. There are many schools of thought on this, but to your mind, how difficult is it going to be for Iraq, for the Iraqi people, and frankly for the stability of the region if President-elect Trump decides to withdraw U.S. troops from Iraq?
Well, look, the U.S. troops were in Iraq based on the invitation from the Iraqi government, and there was a reason. There was ISIS, terrorism, that was threatening the security of the region and actually the security of the whole world. We have that first experience here in Kurdistan. And our Peshmergas were fighting ISIS, and we wanted the coalition forces, the Americans, to come to our help and assist us, and they thankfully did. There was a coalition of forces that came to support Iraq and within Iraq, Kurdistan. Now, if the overall assessment of terrorism has changed, and if Iraq believes that terrorism has come to an end, therefore we don't need American troops here, or we need to end the mission of the coalition forces. That's a different situation. And we may have different ideas, to be frank with you. We don't think that terrorism has come to an end. We think that still ISIS is intact and they have active members. They are active in different parts of, not only in Iraq, but in the region, elsewhere in the world. And we need to have that global coalition to fight terrorism. Now, in terms of organizing or reviewing the relationship of Iraq with the coalition forces, can be different than what's been said. If the mission is no longer needed because Iraq feels it's stronger today and it can face the challenges and control the security situation in the country, that doesn't mean that the relationship between Iraq and the United States will come to an end. So ending the coalition forces or the coalition mission doesn't mean the end of U.S.-Iraqi relationship, even military relationship. So we hope that for as long as Iraq can manage its relationship with all of its partners, whether it's the United States, UK, France, Germany, Italy, any other European country, on bilateral levels, to maintain the good relations where Iraq can benefit from the friendship that is developed with all these partners, we believe that there is a way that can manage and perhaps be less risky in terms of looking at whether or not the security situation is going to be affected by the departure of the coalition forces.
Would it surprise you if U.S. troops were to stay outside of a coalition, perhaps, in some arrangement?
Whether this would surprise me? No.
No.
No. Look, U.S. is staying in many other countries in the region. Not only in Iraq, but in many other Middle Eastern countries. We have U.S. forces. So it's very normal for the U.S. forces to stay in Iraq and have bilateral relations with Baghdad.
When you take a step back and look at what's happened over the last several years, the chaos that's ensued under, frankly, the leadership of the Biden administration in Washington, many people would say the catalyst for President Putin's invasion of Ukraine and what's been happening in Gaza was U.S. inaction and U.S. failure with the withdrawal from Afghanistan. In your mind, has that set a precedent for U.S. activity in the region?
Can you repeat your question?
In your mind, did the disastrous withdrawal by the Biden administration from Afghanistan set a precedent for U.S. activity in this region?
Well, I think any unilateral decision is not going to be the best decision, in my view. The U.S. was invited by the Iraqis, and any departure has to be mutually agreed. The mechanism, the timing, and the way that it needs to depart. But any unilateral decisions, while we have so many pressing issues, is going to cause new problems. And we've had this experience in 2011. In 2011, when the U.S. pulled out their forces, even then, we didn't think that was the best decision, and we anticipated that U.S. will come back, but at a higher cost, which was the case, because the vacuum left after the U.S. pulled out their troops was filled by ISIS and other terrorist organizations, and U.S. had to come back once again. So I hope that there are good decisions and well-calculated decisions. If U.S. wants to pull out, we need to look at what would be the alternative and how those vacuums created behind are going to be filled. We don't want to create another problem.
What's the best case scenario in your mind for your government from a Trump administration? What would you like to see them do?
In Kurdistan region? Well, we have very good relations with the United States. We want to continue having good relations. We want to continue having security cooperation. We want to continue and develop economic relations with the United States. The more development in the region means more stability, and more economic stability leads to more political stability and definitely to more security. So more U.S. engagement in the region, I believe, is going to help the region.
Talk to me about what's happening today with the oil law. What is the status of that legislation?
Iraq doesn't have an oil law. We have a law that belongs to the Saddam's era, which is designed for a central government. It doesn't help a federal system. We have a federal country today. We have a federal system. That centralized law is not helpful in organizing relations between Baghdad and Erbil. And unfortunately, after Baghdad decided to abolish all the previous laws, there is this law still in place, which is shocking. And we need to replace that with a new law. There was a draft back in 2007, but unfortunately was never passed through the parliament. We still believe that we need to have a modern law that is good for a federal system. And once we have that, I believe we can overcome many of the existing problems between Baghdad and Erbil.
Walk us through how much the failure to export is hurting your government. And I'm talking to the tune of $20 billion that you've lost so far.
Yes, almost every month we lose $1 billion. So it's over $20 billion that we've lost as a result of the export of
They're bleeding you dry.
Sorry?
They're bleeding you dry.
Well, unfortunately, this is hurting the rest of the country as well. But definitely, the biggest part of the country that's suffering is Kurdistan. Unfortunately, the losses that we have suffered are not being compensated. We see the delays in the salary payment. We see reduction in the revenues of the overall Iraqi revenues, which is not in the interest of the federal government nor in the Kurdistan region.
Yeah, Baghdad seems to characterize this shutdown of your exports as a way to assuage fears in the broader OPEC Plus group about their production concerns. And I'm talking about the fact that they want Baghdad to stick to its production numbers just like every other member of OPEC Plus is supposed to. In your mind, is that a fair assessment to put that on you?
No. Look, Iraq is producing a certain amount of oil barrels per day, and they have a quota in OPEC. But I can say that what we produce in Kurdistan is much less than what we deserve according to the percentage that Kurdistan is entitled to produce. So let's assume that Iraq is producing more than 4 million or 4.5 million barrels per day. Now the numbers have changed though. But Kurdistan is entitled to produce at least 500,000 barrels. We are producing even less than half of that. So to tell us to reduce production, it's not fair because the overall Iraqi production of oil needs to be reduced according to the quotas designed for Iraq. And it doesn't have to always come on, at the cost of the production in Kurdistan.
How concerned are you by the fact that global oil production and global oil prices are, frankly, falling? Because that will impact your government as well.
We are concerned, but let me tell you one thing. We in Kurdistan have realized that depending on oil as the only revenue for the country is always going to be problematic because the price of oil is not designed by the country. There is a global market for it. So it could go up, it could go down. When price of oil is high, then Iraq can benefit, but when it's down, it's going to affect the function of the government because the budget is not going to basically, be able to support the government's, functions. In Kurdistan, we've realized that. That's why we try to diversify our economy. We try to look at different sources of revenues to invest in agriculture, invest in different industries, invest in tourism to make sure that even if oil is no longer the only revenue or, it's not generating enough revenues for us, we have different sources of revenue. Yeah. I believe that Iraq should have done that. And we look at different parts of the world, especially the oil producers. They're using the revenues generated from oil and investing in different sectors so that to secure different sources for revenues for themselves when even oil is dried out and no longer is available. Iraq is not at that stage, and that is concerning. Mm-hmm. We are concerned about that, but we strongly encourage the federal government in Baghdad, and we certainly in Kurdistan are focusing on how we should diversify our economy to at least reduce the influence of the oil price on our economy.
There's a concern that those here in your part of the world are trucking refined product to Iran. In your mind, is that a practice that should be stopped? Because that is a country, of course, that is under international sanctions.
Well, the sanctions have been imposed, and I don't think that now there is anything legally going through Iran. So it's been stopped, after the new sanctions on the productions, not only on the oil, but on the productions has been imposed. There has been a decision not to send any of those products to Iran.
So to your knowledge, that isn't happening?
Illegally, it may be happening in some places, but not under our control.
Walk me through this. You mentioned other partners and finding other partners for investment. Obviously, the conversation earlier in the day surrounded China's influence in this part of the world, the symbiosis with the United States on multiple issues and how that's evolving and may evolve under a new administration in Washington. Does the current attitude towards China coming from Washington hurt your government in terms of investment potential?
In what sense?
Well, does it keep you from partnering with countries like China that the U.S. may have a problem with from time to time?
Look, we have good relations with the United States and with all of our Western friends. But that doesn't mean that we can't have good relations with China or any other country in the world. We have a free economy, and we are inviting anyone to come and invest in our region, and we hope that our friends would compete over who can come and invest first in Kurdistan. Yeah. But if someone doesn't want to come and invest, they shouldn't be able to stop others to come and invest.
Yeah. So a trade war with China, how does that impact you?
Well, Chinese are in Iraq and also in Kurdistan. They're already investing, and we have a law of investment, and whoever is complying and accepting our regulations and is wishing to invest in Kurdistan is welcomed.
Yeah, this has been an argument, of course, that the United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia and Qatar have faced as well, pressure from the United States not to partner with China on a variety of issues and technologies, for example. Do you think it's fair?
To be fair, we are not being pressured to not, have investments from the Chinese by the Americans or the Western countries.
Well, how would you characterize it? Discouraged?
Well, obviously anyone would be interested in coming and investing themselves, so we encourage them to come and invest if they want to, but no one's forced us to not have relations with China if they wish to invest in our region.
Given the current state of global affairs, do you think that this will force the United States to be more pragmatic in its approach?
Well, I think they have to be, because look, Chinese are investing in the United States. Chinese are investing in Europe. Why can't they invest in our region? I mean, that's a question, right? So whenever you answer that question, I'll answer the rest of your questions.
Talk to me a bit about your relationship today with Turkey. Is that a complex relationship?
We have good relations with Turkey. We have good economic trade and relations with Turkey. We have good understanding on the security situation in the region. And we are also encouraged by the fact that Turkey is looking at different peaceful ways to sort out the problems in the region.
Yeah.
So I would characterize our relations with Turkey as good and even better.
Yeah. And Russia?
With Russia also, we have normal relations. We have Russian companies operating in Kurdistan. We have Rosneft and Gazprom Neft that are already operating in Kurdistan region and the rest of Iraq.
I want to get a sense from you of how you see the regional dynamics changing, and particularly with regards to Syria. Obviously, over the last several months, we've seen an increased number of visits between Bashar al-Assad and his partners in Saudi Arabia, his partners in UAE, things that wouldn't have happened perhaps a few years ago. And the U.S. being so tied up perhaps with other conflicts in the world and conflicts in the region, not really raising much of an eyebrow there. In your mind, are we going to see Syria reintegrated, not just regionally, but globally?
You see, when we're talking about Syria, we have to be careful about what part of Syria we're talking about. There is not one government controlling the entire territories of Syria. We have Syrian government, we have Russia, we have Iran, we have Turkey, we have the United States, we have the rest of the coalition. So we have different groups controlling different parts of the country. But if you mean the government in Damascus, we've seen that over the years, there was a maximum pressure on the government. Everybody was calling for the overthrow of the regime. And now there is, once again, reopening the channels with the government and trying to reintegrate into first to the Arab League and also to the international community. I think it depends on the cost of whatever action you take. If the decision is to overthrow the regime, you have to look at the cost of that and the meaning of what that means actually to the rest of the region and the rest of the players. And if integrating the government into the international community will bring more peace, I think that's something that I believe now many countries are looking at.
Yeah. If the Trump administration were to enact maximum pressure 2.0, for example, do you believe that would accelerate Syria's return to the international order?
I don't know about Syria, but I believe every actor has to rethink. If they want to benefit from normal relations with the United States and other players in the region, they have to perhaps revive their current policies and adopt a new policy that's acceptable, and that would go with for Syria as well, I think.
Yeah. There's a narrative in the West that Iraq is held hostage, that Baghdad is held hostage to Iran. Is that a fair assessment? That Iraq is held hostage by Iran?
Well, that's your terminology. But there is a lot of influence. Iran has a lot of influence in Iraq. That's true. Now, whether this is a decision that Iraqis have made, or it's a decision that's been imposed, I think you better ask Baghdad that question. Is this something that they are happy with or not? But we definitely know that Iran is an important neighbor for Iraq, and it's normal for Iraq to have normal relations with Iran. Now, the level of influence and the nature of relations between Baghdad and Iran, I don't control that. You have to ask them.
I'm waiting for my invitation. Walk me through this one. When you think about what happens next with regards to the internal politics, and I'm talking about the regional dynamic, we've seen enormous strides for women made in Saudi Arabia, something that those of us who cover the region never thought perhaps we would see. We've seen women, of course, taking a major role in the UAE government, for example. Half of the parliament are women. And we see strides made for women here in your government as well. But it seems as if in Baghdad, things are really rolling back. And I'm talking about the possibility that children can be married off at the age of 9. Many in the international human rights community now say that this is tantamount to child rape. In your mind, is that worrying?
Yes. Iraq was one of the most advanced Middle Eastern countries in terms of promoting women's rights. Unfortunately, there are factors that are affecting and influencing the rights of women in countries where poverty, injustice, illiteracy is widespread. And unfortunately, over the years, Iraq hasn't been in its best capacity. We've seen that there is a lot of illiteracy, there is a lot of women that are dropping out of college and school. Definitely this is going to affect the behavior of the society and also the women themselves, the lack of confidence, and that they don't want to participate in the community. In Kurdistan, we have, I think, in a different situation. Our culture is also different. If you look at our history, women have always had greater freedom, and they have had more rights. And over the years, we have tried to give more power to women by promoting their participation in the parliament. There are many parliamentarians that are women today, and many ministers in the cabinet that are women, and many directors and many administrators that are now women. And many women are now businesswomen, very successful businesswomen. So we're trying to give equal opportunities. I'm a little sensitive about saying women's rights because I think they have to have equal rights as men, and you need to pave the road for them.
And just to be clear, that means you would advocate for equal pay for equal work?
Yes.
Every time?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Is that something you enforce in your government?
Well, absolutely, yes.
Yeah. In your mind, what are the things that can be used in the private sector to encourage that? And I'm talking about women on boards.
Look, you need to protect everyone's rights. Let's forget women, okay? Let's talk about citizens, humans. Everyone in the country should have equal rights. There are people who are in the public sector, and there are people who are in the private sector. One of the reasons why private sector in the country has been weak, because they were afraid of retirement. In the private sector, there was no law for anyone that after a few years that they would be retired and they would have pension afterwards. Now we have passed a law in Kurdistan to secure the retirement for private sector as well. This is encouraging many people to not seek the government employment or the public sector, but to look at private sector. So if you provide more opportunities for them, if you create an environment where private sector can grow, I believe that's going to take care of many of the pressing issues that we are facing today. Not only about women, but about the whole economy.
Yeah. In your mind, what is the greatest existential threat to this region today?
Wow, this is a very tough question.
I have a reputation.
I think lack of trust. I think, history has proven that when communities don't trust each other, when systems are built on imposing ideas, when stronger players are dictating and disrespecting others, when democracy means only the rule of majority without regarding the rule of minorities, that's difficult to handle, and it's difficult to create a society where everybody would be happy. You need to feel the sense of belonging, and in order to belong to a society or to a country, you need to feel that you're equal. So the lack of equality, the lack of trust, I believe, is the source of many of the problems that we have.
How do you address that lack of trust? How do you address that lack of trust?
Reverse that. Build trust and provide, equal environments and, be just. So that's exactly what's needed.
Yeah.
And if we can build trust and provide equal opportunities to everyone, I think that will take care of it.
Do you still believe the United States is a partner to trust?
The United States? Yes, I do. Because, look, United States is not just about one person or one administration. United States is a successful country based on values of democracy and principles of equality and freedom. So, yes, the U.S. wouldn't be successful if it wasn't a place that was built on the right foundations. And when you have institutions that endorse these foundations, needs to be trusted.
Your Excellency, thank you so much. Thank you.
From the White House to Gaza, Kyiv to Beijing, elections, economics and the environment compete with conflicts and other complex issues for our attention. In an age of fake news, deep fake and artificial intelligence,
They've got to have a vote and a say.
it's important to look beyond the loudest voice to understand the truth. From newsmakers to groundbreakers,
My campaign is going very well.
presidents, prime ministers, princes and peacemakers, and cultural tastemakers.
As Arabs, as Middle Eastern, we're too emotional.
Join me on the Riz Khan Show for empowering conversation.
At Arabiya News, we go beyond the headlines.
From the latest breaking news to in-depth coverage of global events.
We're not bought or sold. Nobody owns us.
The loss of life, the destruction of property. The conflicts are such a terrible thing.
Context and analysis to help you see the full picture.
The world is in a very dangerous place.
Join us on al-Arabiya News,
It's very impressive.
where knowledge meets perspective.
Guangzhou. When in China, visit Guangzhou. Guangzhou was once called Canton. It is the capital of Guangdong Province and is the host venue for the busy Canton Fair. Thousands of tourists visit the city for a number of reasons: the wonderful scenery, the local culture, and the authentic cuisine. The Pearl River, the third longest river in China, is certainly a breathtaking view. The Nansha Wetland Park is a great relaxing place to experience the natural beauty of Guangzhou. Nansha serves as the best habitat for fish, shrimps, and crabs to thrive. For a glimpse of fascinating architecture, head to the Shamian Island. With amazing buildings and structures alongside cutting-edge works of art, you'll definitely appreciate the diverse yet marvelous design. There's also the Chen Clan Academy, which boasts of the traditional Guangdong architecture. It features one of the best preserved ancestral halls, representing the fascinating folk art of southern China. In the middle of the city, find the Sacred Heart Cathedral on Yide Road, facing the Pearl River. It's quite amazing to find such a place amid the old busy city and noisy surroundings. For a dose of entertainment, catch a classic Cantonese opera while in Guangzhou. The best traditional performances are usually held in the Jiangnan Theater in Haizhu District. When it comes to food, China's 8 regional dishes is well represented in Guangzhou. Their food is known for its tender and slightly sweet taste. You must try Guangzhou's authentic dim sum or have morning tea time with friends and family. Guangzhou has a lot to offer shoppers too. The Canton Fair is the largest trade fair in China, selling a wide variety of goods. Find health products, computer accessories, and garments at the fair and at reasonable prices. You may also find services to help you book hotel or travel requirements here. Another must-see shopping street is the Jiangnan Avenue North, located at the approach bridge of Haizhu Bridge. The street is full of wedding dress shops. Every time the bus passes by this wedding dress street, girls wish that the bus could slow down so they can get a better view of the dresses on display.
At Arabiya News, we go beyond the headlines.
From the latest breaking news to in-depth coverage of global events.
We're not bought or sold. Nobody owns us.
The loss of life, the destruction of property. The conflicts are such a terrible thing.
Context and analysis to help you see the full picture.
The world is in a very dangerous place.
Join us on Al-Arabiya News.
It's very impressive.
Where knowledge meets perspective.
From the White House to Gaza, Kiev to Beijing, elections, economics and the environment compete with conflicts and other complex issues for our attention. In an age of fake news, deepfake and artificial intelligence,
They've got to have a vote and a say.
it's important to look beyond the loudest voice to understand the truth. From newsmakers to groundbreakers,
My campaign is going very well.
presidents, prime ministers, princes and peacemakers, and cultural tastemakers.
As Arabs, as Middle